he's off payroll. Justice Palmer, CEO of Fortuna Investments, thanks for joining us this morning.
Thanks, Michelle.
Staying with international trade relations now, the UK Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, is in Washington and in the next few hours will be at the White House to meet President Donald Trump. The talks are expected to focus heavily on security. Of course, on Tuesday, the Prime Minister announced an increase in the UK's defence spending, marking a big shift in strategy. But there is also the looming threat of those tariffs, as the EU now knows well, and a possible future UK-US trade deal that needs to be discussed. For more on this, we're joined by independent global economist Azad Zangana. Azad, thank you for joining us. Let's start with the tariff announcements this morning. If we could, yesterday we had for the first time a number being put on the kind of tariffs the EU could face, 25%. That seems at the high end of kind of where we were expecting.
You changed your mind.
Oh, yeah.
Essentially, all these tariffs is to change the way that Europe trades and behaves with the US. It can't simply be a small 5 or 10% tariff, because that kind of level of tariff could be absorbed through the supply chain. It doesn't really have as much of an impact, but such a high number would fundamentally make exporting some goods and even services as well, frankly, uneconomical. And so that then grabs the attention of policymakers and forces some kind of change. The intention of the president.
Is the British Prime Minister hoping he can cut essentially a different deal, that he can get maybe better terms?
It's going to be hard because, of course, he's going to want to stand firm with Europe on defence policy and policy with regards to Ukraine. But at the same time, he wants to differentiate the UK from Europe in that, of course, we have had Brexit, we have exited the monetary union, and we have no control over what they decide to do. So there is potentially some ability to differentiate a little bit from the European Union. But it's going to be very difficult because, of course, what the US wants to do is it wants the UK to open up its markets to its goods and reduce the quality standards that are applied to those imports. But if the UK decides to do that, that then makes it very difficult to then export to the EU because of the cross-contamination that might happen. And of course, the European market is a more important market for the UK economy than the US market.
So is that balancing? You're making me think of the time when we had all those debates about chicken, opening the market to more US chickens, where again, as you point out, the standards are somewhat different.
Exactly. The standards are very different on agricultural products, on some chemical products as well. They are generally considered to be at a higher standard and a more costly standard as well, applied by the EU. And if the UK wants to continue to trade with the EU, then those safeguards have to sort of...
And is there something else that I have to put in of yours here?
Choices ahead there.
What?
UK Prime Minister, independent global economist
What?
Azad Zangana.
It's a lot.
Join us.
A lot that has to go in here still? Like what?
And we turn to air travel, where a growing demand is driving major expansion projects across the globe. In the UK, the government has tentatively approved the creation of a second runway at Gatwick Airport just outside London. Transport Secretary Heidi Alexander saying she is minded to approve the regular use of what is currently an emergency runway. But there is strong opposition, with some lawmakers, local authorities and residents all pushing back. Something that has delayed airport expansion in the UK before, while competitors in Europe have moved forward. One transport analyst says this has held the UK back.
This is, of course, why Britain has struggled for economic growth for the last 15 or more years. Gatwick is a very successful airport. It is running very close to its peak capacity. It is the world's busiest single runway airport. So they have drawn everything they can out of what they got. They now need to expand. If they can do that, that will help businesses nearby, which are reliant on that airport to get their customers in, to get some of their suppliers in, to go and visit new customers. And adding it will, of course, boost growth.
Now, if you grew up in the 90s, this might make you feel older. As Pokemon, well, it's 29 years old. The name is short for Pocket Monster, and in its lifetime, it has expanded from trading cards to video games to plush toys and a lot more. For a closer look at the secret of their success, Marika Ward caught up with the boss of the Pokemon company.
How did the original games were groundbreaking because they allowed users to exchange Pokemon they catch with their friends and other players. So it wasn't an introverted activity, but it became a tool to actively communicate with others. The number of Pokemon which started at 161 has increased to more than 1,000, and their fans also grew and now span across several generations. Our mission statement is to enrich both the real world and the virtual world with the Pokemon characters. Pokemon Go is the perfect example, because you can look for Pokemon in the real world.
What about counterfeits and patent infringement? You recently sued the maker of the hit Pokemon adventure game, Hogwarts. What are you doing about
Okay, so this is what I need. This is what
We've been fake since the beginning. The more popular Pokemon became, the worse the problem. It affects our creativity, and our customers get disappointed when they receive products that aren't authentic.
This is a shirt I'm gonna wear.
But that's not their only challenge. I'm at one of 2 dozen Pokemon centers where they sell toys,
This-
stationeries, cars, you name it. But there's a separate resale market where Pokemon cards change hands at astronomical price tags. Influencer Logan Paul currently holds the Guinness World Record for the most expensive Pokemon trading card, which he bought for more than $5 million.
If the cards are rare or seen as vintage, their value goes up. But it's not our place to say that they are not valuable. To us, the true value of Pokemon is to play, have fun, and communicate with friends.
Along with Hello Kitty and Super Mario, Pokemon is one of Japan's 3 big soft characters. And the Pokemon Company is the only one that remains private despite its huge revenue.
Hello Kitty is one of the characters for Sanrio, and Super Mario is one of the characters for Nintendo. Pokemon is the only thing we do with the Pokemon Company. So whatever we make a Pokemon,
I'll put
we
the
have to
air
invest in Pokemon. If we go public, we have to focus on
My
growing our
head is like,
profitability. And investors might ask, what are you going to do when the popularity of Pokemon dies down? And our answer will be, we'll go bust when Pokemon is no longer popular.
I've got some questions from my kids who are big Pokemon fans. There have been some controversies over the decision to retire Ash or Satoshi.
Okay, this you want me to take here, honey?
Yes, please, thank you,
What happened to
honey.
him in his retirement?
So much.
Yeah, pretty
That's the
full.
hardest question
It's okay. I won't take it. Yeah, I will not bring anything.
But it's only
I
when
will
you
not
see
give
on
you
TV,
anything.
even though the camera might not be following them. Our journey is continuing, and his partner Pikachu is right next to
So
him.
hot.
Oh, honey, you got some more
You never
jeans
know
here,
the
huh?
value of those Pokemon
Huh?
cards.
You got
Now,
these
in
jeans
other
here?
news, shares in
I will wear that.
jumped over 15%.
And this one, I will put in my other luggage here. Oh.
The UK Aerospace Company announced
Which
its
one?
underlying operating profits were
What you'll
last
put?
year on strong demand.
Here, too. My, ano.
Rolls-Royce upgraded its
I might have the room here, honey.
Okay, I'll put it there then.
Might be okay, but I just have these that to
The
put.
crypto
I'm
trading
wearing these, I'm wearing it, got another t-shirt for tomorrow. And I got another t-shirt in there for the day after.
Some of
This
its
goes in
losses
there.
were crowdsourcing
I
online
gotta put my
bounty hunters.
shaver
Last
stuff in
week,
that.
Apple believed to be
So we'll shave it now.
Lazarus Group stole $1.5 billion from the firm. Bybit is now offering cash rewards to anyone who spots and prevents them from cashing out.
Okay.
And that is all we'll do. Stay with us here on BBC News. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.
I just took a shower at work without. You know why? Because this is the Emirates A380.
There's no limit to how far a dream can take you. Star in your own adventure now. Qatar Airways.
Soaring into the skies and beyond. Burj Al Zizi, the world's second tallest tower. Ambitious, glamorous,
What do we have that's cold in there?
a seven-star
In the fridge.
penthouses and residences. The world's highest observation
I
deck,
can put that in.
cinema,
Just a few. You want
and spa. World-class restaurants, a sky
water?
fitness sanctuaries, and
There.
Azizi.
Okay.
No.
You're green.
In the world of
Business and BBC News make the connection.
Hello, this is your update from the BBC Sports Centre. Reflecting on the Premier League midweek games first, Liverpool have 13 points clear and a win for Manchester United, who beat Ipswich Town with winger Alejandro Garnacho in the headlines today. He was substituted early on and headed straight to the changing room.
Hey, do you know where you put your mask?
Ruben Amorim said he'd speak to the player about it.
I want
Garnacho was
one,
substituted
please.
for 44 minutes by Amorim in an immediate reaction to Patrick Dorothy's red card. Moving forward, replaced by Hussein Masraoui. The Argentine went straight down the tunnel as United fans in Old Trafford appeared to boo the decision to take the winger off.
The thinking was that we play more in the 5-3-1. I know that is a risk because you are taking one, maybe the only player now that we have 1 against 1 in pace. And then we make the substitution and we have to choose someone to go out. We have to think about set pieces also, so it was my choice. What I'm saying is that I'm going to talk obviously with Garnacho about that. So we'll talk about that if you want in the next weeks.
More action to come later on. West Ham could move level on points with Manchester United and Spurs if they beat Leicester later at the London Stadium. Leicester are 5 points from safety after losing every game so far in February.
I call it a mountain to climb, and it's but life is about climbing mountains. The mountains are there to be climbed. And that challenge I take, and when I'm on that process, which I am, together with the team and everybody involved, we'll keep climbing. And we drop sometimes, we slip sometimes on the mountain, but we get up and start again.
Well, watch out in the Champions Trophy to tell you about between Pakistan, the hosts, and Bangladesh, with rain forcing the match to be abandoned in Rawalpindi without a ball being bowled. It's the second match in the city to fall victim to the weather following the abandonment of Australia's meeting with South Africa on Tuesday. Nothing riding in this match for either side, though. Both Pakistan and Bangladesh had already been eliminated from the tournament, having lost their opening 2 matches, though Pakistan, the holders, will finish bottom of Group A. A huge match to come on Friday after eliminating England from the competition. Pakistan will now have to face the reigning Cricket World Cup champions. They have to beat Australia on their final group match of the competition to make it to the next round. Their captain Hashmatullah Shahid believes his team is up to the task.
We have planning for all Australian team, and I know that he played very well in 2023 World Cup, but that's part of the history. After that, we beat them in the T20 World Cup, and we have to thank them all, and we will try our best to come with a plan.
And a shock at the Mexico Open in the tennis world. Number 2, Alex Zverev is out, beaten by teenager Leonard Tien in the second round. Tien knocked out Britain's Cameron Norrie in the first round and won this against Zverev in straight sets. Tien is the youngest American man to record a victory against the top 3 opponent since Andy Roddick in 2001. And there's been much change in the F1 paddock so far. Even I should say. Lewis Hamilton now, of course, driving with Ferrari. The man who replaced Carlos Sainz has topped the early pace setting and testing at Bahrain for his new team, Williams. Hamilton posted the fastest lap of the morning session ahead of George Russell's Mercedes, the 7-time world champion, taking advantage of a drier final hour leading up to the lunch session. And you can keep up to date with all of that over on the BBC Sport website. But that's all the sport from us for now. Christian.
Gavin, thank you very much. We've had some news in the last few minutes that the jailed militant leader, Abdullah Öcalan, has called on his Kurdistan Workers' Party to lay down its arms on Thursday and move it to then its 40-year conflict with Turkey. In a statement, Öcalan said all groups must lay down their arms and the PKK must dissolve itself. PKK is the terrorist organisation.
And they'll put a bottle of water in my feet for now. Okay.
40,000 people have been killed since the PKK first launched its fight against Turkey in 1984 with the aim of carving out an ethnic homeland for Kurds. It's since moved away from its separatist goals and instead sought more autonomy in the southeast of the country for greater Turkish rights. Big development in that part of the world. Now, thousands of forced labourers who've been released from scam centres or fraud factories along the Thai-Myanmar border are now stranded in makeshift camps in Myanmar, with some recording low food supplies and poor sanitation. The labourers from countries around the world were lured to these centres by fake promises of good jobs. Our correspondent Jonathan Head is in Thailand.
The buildings you can see behind me, those white buildings there, that's one of, we think, around maybe up to 30 scam compounds that have been constructed along this border, right along for long distance, over the last few years. Built by Chinese gambling syndicates. In them, they have been carrying out elaborate fraud where they persuade people all over the world to part with their savings, and they use labour, basically people who've been lured here, again from all over the world. They need all kinds of languages to do it, and those people in many cases have been tricked and then forced, using torture and beatings, to keep going. It's a notorious business. It's deeply involved in other areas of transnational crime, and in the last couple of weeks, the Thai authorities, the Thai government here has decided it's had enough. It's cut power, it's cut telecoms, and that has forced the militias who control Myanmar. They were in on the scams.
11:50 a.m.
Because they're being hurt so badly by their severing of ties with Thailand to start releasing the workers. So around 8,000 have been freed from these scam centres. The one behind me is called Banya. We believe that most of the workers have been taken out of that. But the problem is their only way out is through Thailand. Thailand has to process them. That's a very slow process. And in the meantime, these people are stuck in Mexican camps over the border in deteriorating conditions.
The frenzy of construction has now stopped. The rows of featureless buildings which have sprung up along the Murray River are now being emptied of their workers. Many have been trafficked and horribly mistreated. When asked, nearly all want to go home. Last month, Thailand cut fuel and power to the scam compounds, forcing their militia allies to start freeing the workers. This group was pushed over the narrow river on a raft and taken in by the Thai army. Hundreds of Chinese workers have already been flown home, though they were clearly being treated as criminals, not victims. But the flow of evacuees to Thailand has now stopped. I spoke to Mike, an Ethiopian stranded in Myanmar, with 400 others who escaped.
The conditions we are in is very harsh. We are sleeping on the floor. The bullets are really messed up right now. I just want to go home. I just want to go back to my country. That is all I want.
For years, Thailand has been accused of doing too little to stop compounds like the one behind me from running their fraud and human trafficking scams. Well, now Thailand has started to act, forcing the armed militias over the border to free thousands of trapped workers. Yet it seems no one has thought through how to move so many people from so many countries back here to safety and back to their own homes. For the moment, Thailand is reluctant to bring over more if their own governments aren't ready to fly them home.
Unfortunately, we are hearing distressing information about lack of sanitations and toilets. Many of them were actually screened for TB and were positive for TB. So we're hearing from them that they're coughing up blood. Our worry is that we're not engaging fast enough, and these people are actually basically suffering while they're waiting.
You see, there is many army also in this area. So if they will find me,
it's very dangerous. We met Arian, a young Bangladeshi man who escaped from a notorious compound last October. He's come back to try to free 17 friends who are still there. He describes a brutal regime with frequent electric shock torture.
their goal is very hard. They have the target every week $5,000. If no, every we need to earn for them $5,000. How many people it's like many people.
Hello?
I don't count, but like
20, 50,
Hello?
100.
Yeah.
Even now, there are thousands still working under duress in these compounds, stretching right along this border. The civil war in Myanmar has ignited an epidemic of transnational crime, which is proving difficult to control.
Thanks to Jonathan Head for that. Plenty more on the website in relation to that story. Just want to bring you some news we're getting from the Tate brothers. We've been reporting that the controversial social media influencers Andrew and Tristan Tate, are en route to the United States, having left Romania this morning. A spokesperson for the brothers said that properties, vehicles, bank accounts and company shares have all been returned to the pair before they set off for the United States. Clearly the Trump administration has had some influence in that. It was raised, the issue, with the Romanian Foreign Secretary at the Munich Security Conference last week, and now they have been freed from house arrest and are on their way to the United States. Matthew is coming up with Verified Live very shortly. Just to mark your card that there's a very important afternoon ahead. In fact, a pivotal 48 hours. We can show you pictures of President Zelensky, who's now en route to Washington. That's him leaving Shannon Airport just a short time ago. Prime Minister Keir Starmer already there. That meeting expected to take place in the next couple of hours, and Matthew will have all the...
Are you good, see, with everything?
So yeah. Anyway, just watching BBC News.
It's 7 o'clock. So if we go back 9 hours, 7 o'clock. It's like 10 o'clock.
The sun rises brilliantly here. History was written here. Culture became glorious here. Eastern Anatolia, the timeless journey.
Hello there, it's North America first of all, where at the moment it's quite warm for this time of the year. It will be turning colder though across eastern Canada and around the Great Lakes. And here we've got an area of low pressure that's bringing some snow to some areas as well. South of that, a little bit of rain on the way down towards Georgia. Through the plains and into western parts of North America, we've got high pressure here. It's keeping it dry and it's keeping it sunny as well. It's quite sunny across Venezuela, but as you move down into Colombia, into Ecuador, into Peru, heavy rain and the risk of some further flooding here. Got some rain developing in the Pampas. That's going to move northwards, but across northern Argentina, it's still hot and dry in the sunshine. And in Scandinavia, temperatures are above average for the time of year. It's very mild here. Going to get a bit chillier, I think, across southern parts of Europe. You're going to find more showers breaking out here. Across the southeast of Europe, it's not as cold, though, as it has been of late. Some of the rain that's coming into Iberia will affect Morocco as well by the end of the week. Most of the seasonal rains are a long way south, of course. Some very wet weather also around Madagascar as well as the Eastern Cape in South Africa. Any showers through the Middle East are temporarily, at least, moving away. Still got some strong winds around the Gulf, and it's still quite chilly here for this time of the year. We've got some wetter weather coming into northern parts of Pakistan, the northwest of India. Heavy, perhaps thundery rain, a lot of snow to come over the Himalayas into Nepal. And these showers that we've got in Sri Lanka are moving their way into the far south of India. The showers that we've seen in Japan are moving away. It's actually getting a bit warmer here at long last. It's also getting warmer across the Korean Peninsula and some higher temperatures developing in eastern parts of China in the sunshine. A lot of heat across Southeast Asia, where we've got mostly dry and sunny weather here. It's also very warm or hot across most of Australia. And again, dry weather around too. And we still have some dry weather to end the week in New Zealand, but the high pressure is going to give way, and we'll see some rain arriving into the South Island during the weekend.
Ukraine is just about holding the front in the Kharkiv region, while the Russians have launched this fresh assault.
There are uprooted trees, there are bits of buildings, and the destruction is just in every direction.
Incendiary drones were dropped here, artillery, airstrikes. We knew this was a military junta because the Russians don't have that kind of weaponry.
When you can hear the tear gas and something loaded, the protesters were just down that road. You can see the water cannon now spraying them.
What are you working on, honey?
Ready? There, story breaks. BBC News.
Going back to a little snow, honey.
Live from London, this is BBC News. The UK Prime Minister heads to the White House for crucial talks with Donald Trump.
I'm Katrina Perry at the White House, where the Prime Minister's visit comes as part of a concerted European effort to shore up support for Ukraine, coming after the visit of the French President and ahead of the Ukrainian President tomorrow.
Tributes pour in for the Hollywood star Gene Hackman, who's been found dead alongside his wife, Betsy Arakawa, in the US. And the online influencer Andrew Tate and his brother have been allowed to leave
Michelle's there.
for the US. The lawyer
Picking his nose. No, honey.
Say they're dismayed and distraught.
Pulling up his pants.
As I understand it, they now feel that they've been completely abandoned, and that Tates will never see a criminal prosecution.
I don't know if Kevin's
Hello, welcome to BBC News. The UK Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer is expected at the White House in the next couple of hours to meet with Donald Trump. It is a hugely important meeting as European leaders try to persuade the US President to do more to support Ukraine. Trade and tariffs will also dominate, as well as the Middle East. To throw into the mix the unpredictability that comes with any of these set-piece events with Donald Trump.
What's that?
And it's likely to be a fascinating and consequential meeting. Well, Katrina Perry is live for us in Washington. Together we'll take you through that event live here on this programme. Katrina, over to you.
Thanks, Matthew. Well, we are here at the White House, where I think the UK Prime Minister has brought the rain with him. That's why I'm holding this umbrella here. A nice bit of British weather in Washington this morning. And already Sir Keir Starmer has begun his diary agenda for today. He's up on Capitol Hill at the moment, meeting some members of Congress, because of course it's important to convince President Donald Trump of the need for support for Ukraine, but potentially any funding, any deployment of troops will also need congressional support as well. So that's a key part of his visit here to Washington. A little later he'll arrive here at the White House, where he'll be greeted by President Donald Trump. They will go into the Oval Office then, and they'll briefly speak to the media at that stage. We know President Trump makes himself very available to ourselves and our colleagues during this administration, so there'll be a few questions at that point to the Prime Minister and to the President. Then they'll have a bilateral meeting. They'll also have lunch together.
If you knew I was watching, you'd wave and wave to me.
We'll bring you that bit of information as soon as we get it. And then after that,
I was watching him,
formal
you'd wave to me, honey.
as we've seen President Trump do with the other foreign leaders who have come through Washington DC here and take a lot of questions. Of course, we'll have all of that live here on BBC News. But as he said there, a key top of the agenda is shoring up support for Ukraine, in particular a security backstop for any deal that may come down the line. It's really, really important from the European perspective. We heard President Macron mention that on Monday. Keir Starmer will be talking about it today, and of course President Zelensky himself will be here tomorrow. Well, my colleague, our diplomatic correspondent Tony Glanville, has been looking at the visit so far, and he has this report.
2 p.m. for the price of one. The Prime Minister and Peter Mandelson, Ambassador to the United States, pressing the flag of the reception at the British Embassy. Willing senior members of Donald Trump's administration even risking a joke, not quite at the president's expense. You could say it was a new leader thing, but he's a real one-off, a pioneer in business and politics.
That's true.
That's true. But to us, he's just Peter. Despite tensions over Ukraine and trade, they came to praise Mr. Trump and explain to him about the importance of Britain's relationship with the US. We are living through a very, very significant moment for our alliance between our two countries, and you have a leader in this country, in the President, who in my view is going to be a very consequential president for this country and indeed.
About 11:27
And what the President decides about the war in Ukraine is top of the agenda for today's talks. He's offering Russia concessions to get a quick ceasefire, but the Prime Minister wants a US military backstop to guarantee Ukraine's security and protect Kiev's rooftops in the years ahead. He's hoping the promise of more UK defence spending and yes, more lavish praise will get him a hearing from the President who says he won't make security guarantees beyond very much.
I'm here to meet another close friend of the United Kingdom, President Trump. My message is really simple. There is no more important relationship for the United Kingdom in defence, security, and trade, and trust finance.
The Prime Minister also met business leaders, making the case for more trade from the US and investments in AI, despite Mr. Trump's promise to impose 25% tariffs on British goods.
We want to strike a new partnership. We share the view that our best days lie ahead, and taking out a chainsaw is so we are stripping away red tape and bureaucracy.
Thus the warm words and unctuous diplomacy at the start of Sakir's visit. The hard talking comes later, on which much depends. James Landau, BBC News.
I'm joined now by Michael Martin, who is a partner at Overton Advisory but works for the US State Department under Presidents Obama, Trump and Biden. Michael, thanks for joining us here on BBC News. We heard James and the clips in that package there from the ambassador, from the Prime Minister, talking about the special relationship, how consequential this visit is. In the context of Ukraine and securing peace there, how consequential do you see this visit?
Yeah, I think it is a consequential visit. I think Starmer's doing a good job of softening the ground. Coming out with the defense spending increase and talking about investments in the U.S. from UK businesses, and at the same time, he's coming with his ask. He's asking for an American hard power guarantee in Ukraine post ceasefire, and I think that's going to be a big ask because I think President Trump instinctively is going to be opposed to it. I think he's going to be focused more on economic deterrence and trying to make it easier for American companies to access Ukrainian markets, and using that as a different type of deterrence that doesn't involve American military.
We saw President Macron when he was here on Monday try to make the same ask to President Trump, and President Trump in the meantime has repeated his point that he doesn't want to see US troops there. So how big of an ask is it for Sir Starmer to try again today?
I think it is a pretty big ask, but I think Starmer has done a good job of kind of avoiding the pitfall that Macron fell into, which was telling President Trump that he's making a mistake. I think the fastest way to get President Trump to do something is to tell him that it's a mistake. Whereas I think Starmer has focused much more on the relationship itself and trying to show that there are other ways of doing it that will benefit America too. Starmer's walking a bit of a tightrope, as you mentioned, with potentially incoming tariffs and things like that. But I do think the approach that he's taking in the form of whether it be flattery or a bit more transactionalism, and also importantly what he's not saying, he's not coming in talking about Israel-Palestine and those type of things. I think that's going to follow like a longer way than Macron's approach.
We've seen much concern amongst European leaders in recent weeks about what appears to be a softening of US relations towards Russia. Do you think that Sir Keir Starmer will be trying to roll back that position from President Trump as well?
I do think so. I think Starmer will go in and probably, he might, I don't know, but I think he might go in and highlight that in some ways Russia is kind of put all its bets on President Trump, and it is a bit of a fragile space that they're in. They don't really have a hedge. And I think if you think of it from that perspective, from the Trumpian perspective, that's a lot of leverage that President Trump could have, which is why I think Russia's tone in this is kind of softened. They're trying to muddy the waters a bit with Ukrainian sovereignty, obviously, in the sense of offering minerals that are in occupied areas that are Ukrainian soil. But at the same time, I think if Starmer can press that point, it'll also potentially shift the mindset of President Trump and give him a bit of a sense of, I have leverage, what do I get out of this? that isn't a way of saying, again, I don't think the approach is to tell President Trump that he's wrong or making a mistake. I don't think that will get him far. It's more about what is Starmer going to offer him when it comes to the U.S.-Russia approach, and I think that's an avenue that he would probably find a lot of benefit in.
We'll wait to see what the two leaders say a little bit later on. Michael Martin, thanks for joining us here on the BBC News. And Matthew, of course, we will have all of that here a little bit later in the programme, but now back over to you.
Katrina, thanks very much to that meeting. We are expecting those first pictures from the White House, which Katrina was taking us through. There'll also be, as well as the usual pictures, those first comments from the two leaders. So all of that will happen throughout the course of today's programme here on Verified Live. So let's continue with this. Let's speak to Alistair Campbell, former Director of Communications for Tony Blair, who actually sat in on at least a dozen presidential meetings himself. Alistair, welcome here to the programme. Lots to get through, but let's start. What are the do's and don'ts of this meeting when it comes to Sir Keir Starmer?
Well, I think we always said that he's dealing with a president, frankly, like no other that has gone before, and actually very different even to the one that Donald Trump was in his first term. Much more nationalistic in the way he expressed himself, much more bullish, much more aggressive, I think much more confident. And I think in terms of do's, we're very, very clear about the messages that we want to land with him. Insofar as possible, make them the same messages that we're landing with the public.
Hey, Andy, we have a very early flight from Doha.
Montreal? 8:25. It's like you were already at the airport already. Huh?
I think everybody around the world.
If you want, you can stay there, take the next flight. No, I
to stand alongside the President of the United States and run into them. That is
I know you can do that for me.
That is absolutely.
No, honey.
Just President Macron got the balance just about right between, if you like, the flattery and the demands.
But he did fact check him at one stage, and that is that important if the same thing happens again where he says things that are not factually true. It's interesting because what Macron fact checked him about, he repeated in that first cabinet meeting yesterday. So if the same sort of scenario arises, what should Sir Keir Starmer do?
So this is why it's so difficult to do with Donald Trump, because you're right that President Macron corrected him on that specific thing. The fact is, a journalistic fact checker could probably have done 10 things before that you could have fact checked on. I think it has to be, I read out the point I made earlier, if it relates to one of the very few points that you're going to be trying to make to the public, then I think it's worth doing. I wouldn't do it necessarily by grabbing the guy's hand or grabbing the guy's thigh or whatever. But I think, for example, when Macron talks about Russia being the aggressor, he didn't say, and by the way, Donald, you keep going on about the Ukraine cause this war. He didn't do that. What he kept saying, the aggressor was Russia. I think there are ways of doing this. On the podcast I did with Roy Stewart, we interviewed recently Kevin McCarthy out in Dallas. And he said he obviously knows Donald Trump and how to do Donald Trump very, very well. He did make an interesting observation. He said, you can say things to Donald Trump's face, and he will register them, and he might not take offence. He does take offence, he will bribe him. But if you say things to his face in public that he takes to be undermining him or his position, then he takes it very, very badly. So it's a question of how you express your own view and your own national interest. But I think as long as you make it clear and you stand up for your own national interest, you can go a long way.
Quick couple of questions in terms of how to calibrate what you're asking for. So we know that Sir Keir Starmer, among other European leaders, pushing for greater US security guarantees. Again, yesterday in that cabinet meeting, we talked about it. So that's for Europe. Do you ask for that, even though you think you know the answer? And similarly, a second thought about the Brits love to talk about the special relationship. It has been important for generations, but is it still a special relationship? I think it's the 10th leader that comes in.
Yeah, I would say that on the first, do you point it out? I go back to the point I made earlier. You state what your position is. You talk about why it matters to Ukraine and to the whole of Europe and to the wider world if Putin is allowed to think, or to the public to think that he's won this war. You state why it's important that those security guarantees matter. If you go in there and say, listen, you know, you're the big guy and you're supposed to be looking after the little guys, then that's not going to work. So I think it's a question of stating your position. And then the point about the special relationship, I think something, I think the Americans sometimes feel that we're the media about this. But I think right now, if you look at the list of countries that are in a special position, the UK is one of them, because we are in the European power. And also, so I think it's not, there's no point banging on about it, but also I think it's absolutely impressed if you go about how much of local people, how much of those going off in terms of the hard facts of this all matter. And I think somehow getting into Donald Trump's head, that he sees himself as this great strong leader. This is a place where real strength means standing up for values, for principles that America and the UK have had against for a very long time.
A final thought then, what leverage, what powers do you think the UK Prime Minister really has? And then when you see what's happened in the last month, we haven't seen Donald Trump in any way criticising or standing up for Vladimir Putin. We have seen him pick fights with Ukraine, with Canada, with Greenland, with European leaders. Do you understand why he is doing that, why that approach is the one that's been adopted, and what it actually means for the rest of the West?
He is upending lots of the norms and lots of the conventions and lots of the world order that we sort of took for granted. And he's doing it in a very Trumpian way. He is literally breaking things to see what then emerges. Do I understand why he's doing it? I think I can't claim to be anyone inside his head, but I think that partly he wants people to understand that he is the most powerful man in the world. He wants people to understand that he has decided to be a massive disruptor in the world, and he has decided that those norms and conventions have got to go. Now we have to argue for the parts of that we want to hold on to. I don't think we will make a difference about the case that has to we're going to be increasing defence spending. Lots of us have been arguing for that for some time. I think we're going to be community about it, saying we should have been service. We should have realised that this relationship was changing. But I think then there is so much else that can be brought to bear in terms of talking about, and I didn't do it in a sort of cliche way. It's about day-to-day interaction between business, the way that our intelligence forces work together, the way that our military have worked together so much, the cultural ties that bind us together. And I actually think this is a massive, massive challenge for Kurdistan today. It's also a huge opportunity, because this is when, these are moments when statecraft and leadership really define people's premiership. And so, the next few hours, there is a chance that this will define the UK government and the success of that government for some time to come.
Well, Alistair Campbell, thanks very much for joining us on the programme. As you say, it is going to be a crucial next couple of hours, and we can see all that play out here on the BBC. So with us all that. So plenty more on that major story here in the next little while. In a moment or two, though, we're going to switch topics and get the very latest after the news of the death of the Hollywood giant Gene Hackman. We will talk to Emma Vardy, she's there in LA for us, and the film critic Jason Solomon's also waiting to talk to me. So much more on that story here in a moment or two. Around the world and across the UK, you're watching BBC News.
You don't like this, honey? You don't like.
What, honey?
Why?
No, we're gonna go home today and have some soup.
Woo.
No thanks.
What is that?
This is the most dangerous move in jiu-jitsu. Never do this unless you're drilling and your partner knows it's coming. I have seen.
Shout out, people of the universe. Mm-hmm.
Welcome back to BBC News. Now, tributes have been pouring in for one of the Hollywood greats, the double Oscar winner Gene Hackman, who's been found dead. To get over there to Albert family home in New Mexico. He was 95. Well, so many tributes in so far that just one to read out Francis Ford Coppola, who directed in the conversation, posted Gene Hackman, a great actor, inspiring and magnificent work from Mexico. Well, let's go straight to our correspondent Emma Bardi, who's in Los Angeles, and a great shot with this news. But do we know any more about the circumstances?
Not a lot. Hollywood is really just waking up to the news here in the early morning. Now, of course, it's Oscars week too, so lots of big name actors are in town. And it is a great shock that Gene Hackman, 95 years old, and his wife, Betsy, who's 63, found dead together, along with one of their dogs, at the family home yesterday. It was the county sheriff's office of Santa Fe in New Mexico that confirmed the news. And the authorities are investigating. The words they're using is that they don't suspect any foul play. There is some reporting here coming out from members of his family, but nothing confirmed yet as to the cause of death. But I suspect that more will start to come out during the course of the day. And as you say, here in Hollywood, he was very much loved for his roles. He won 2 Oscars during his career, for his role in the Clint Eastwood movie Unforgiven, and for his role in French Connection. So many tributes coming in this morning. There's also, of course, memorably Lex Luthor in Superman 2. Many people remember him in that role, and I expect we'll hear many more tributes coming in today. He's being called a legendary performer. He'll be very much missed in Hollywood.
We'll talk to you more throughout the course of the programme. Thanks very much. We'll talk more about his extraordinary career, but we'll talk to Jason Solomons in a moment. But I just want to play just one clip from probably his most famous film, 1971 film, The French Connection, which won him, of course, that first Oscar.
In case you were wondering how foreign affairs are going to leadership is biased in the United States, consider this. The country of France.
Let's speak to the film critic Jason Solomons. Jason, great to have you on the programme. One of the greats. It's often said that here it is absolutely balanced.
It is. Not only because he's a great actor, but because he was in so many great films. When you think of Gene, remember, there's so many of them, almost your favourite films, and much of that is because they star Gene Hackman or they feature Gene Hackman. You're not necessarily the big star man, the big leading man. He's the sort of second character, the minor character, the character actor who could actually kind of fill that screen and pull your eyes to it all the time. You always think of the names of these films and you think, gosh, look how Gene Hackman, I love those films. Well, I heard today about his passing. I was genuinely very upset because it puts a sort of final nail in the coffin of a great era of filmmaking that is sort of getting further and further distant. Cinema doesn't come up with these movies that we used to go and see on a Saturday night that starred Gene Hackman. We don't have movie stars like that anymore.
You touched on it, but in one of the other tributes, one of the actors was making the point that he could play anyone, a towering presence for an everyday Joe, and that was really the case. You believe whatever character he played.
Yes, I mean, you mentioned Unforgiven, okay, so that was a Western. Of course, then we showed a French Connection, which was a sort of gritty police noir set in New York, but it sort of had caught the same cowboy tendency to that art. They could do the same as Lex Luthor in Superman. He could do the same when he was in the military in films like Crimson Tide or No Way Out, those sort of big, almost blockbuster thrillers of the 90s that people used to go to the cinema to see. He could do it in comedy in The Royal Tenenbaums for Wes Anderson or in Get Shorty, the film directed for Barry Levinson. The range is quite extraordinary, and the range and the way that he could surprise you with every shot. You just never quite knew how Gene Hackman was going to deliver them.
line, or what was bubbling underneath? Was he going to spit it out? Was it going to be a violent line, or was it going to be a dry, laconic, deadpan line? Sometimes they were the same, and the movie was the same, but the movie kind of took the shape around Gene Hackman. He was that big, you called him a giant man, but he was. And the movie seemed to take place around him.
I love the line that I read that he said at Hollywood that he was convinced for a long while he had to be handsome to make it, and he said his idol was Errol Flynn, and we looked in the mirror, it was no Errol Flynn, but he was absolutely determined, I think from the age of 10, to be an actor.
That's what's interesting about that era of actors, and we don't have it so much anymore, and that they were in Lee Harvey and Paul Newman, they brought a life, an exterior life, a life before the screen. They brought that with them. Gene Hackman was in the army, he was in the Marines, he saw service, and you felt that there was a real life lived in that face, and that face therefore arrived, it was sort of formed already. It didn't really change for about sort of 3 or 4 decades. Gene Hackman, I don't know how old Gene Hackman was, he was almost the same age in the 70s, 80s, or 90s, or 2000s. It's quite extraordinary achievement, the way he looked, hair, you know, and nobody ever saw a hairdresser, you know, I mean, he didn't look like someone who spent hours in the makeup chair unless it was necessary for a bit of facial hair. He didn't need all of that. He brought all those characters with him. You saw that he had not most of the characters he played with drawing on them. I think that's the thing that all of acting we don't have anymore. People just gone to film school, and Gene Hackman's film school was life itself.
30 seconds, you told our producer you almost called your child after him. I think Popeye Dawn is an odd name to choose, but you resisted in the air.
He would have been great. The only problem was that another sort of friend of mine called him Dog, who got about 6 months before. He'd been in Gene, and I just couldn't sort of summon them like that. In the park shouting Gene, but you know what? Today it's worth shouting Gene because that's a name, it's a legendary Hollywood name, and I'm really going to miss Gene Hackman.
Jason Graham, to talk to you. Thank you so much for being here on the program with those thoughts. We're going to take a break. We're talking about Andrew Tate and his brother leaving Romania, heading to the US. That story is here next on BBC.
Hello there, across the Middle East, whilst it's turning dry, it's still quite cold for many at this time of the year, but there could be a few challenges over the coming few days. We'll have a look at that in just a moment. Across Northern Africa, for the most part, it's dry, except in the northwest around Morocco, where we're going to fancy cooler, wetter weather here, not just on Friday, but into the weekend as well. Seasonal rain much further south, of course, and whilst it's not as wet in Botswana, it's going to be very wet in Zambia, and we have a tropical cyclone close to the far south of Madagascar that's going to bring some very wet and very windy weather here. Also got still a number of thunderstorms affecting the eastern parts of South Africa, and that could continue to plague Joburg over the coming few days. There may even be a little bit of rain in Cape Town to start the weekend, and then it gets much warmer here. Some colder out in place though in Morocco, chances of some rain from time to time. The temperatures across many other parts of Northern Africa are turning to lift. Still quite chilly though for this time of the year around the Middle East. The showers that we've had cleared away by Friday, so it is looking dry and sunny on the whole. But we're going to find strong winds continuing into Friday around the Gulf, so that means some rough seas here. A lot of few showers coming into the Mediterranean, coming to coastal areas on Saturday before they then fade away. Temperatures continuing to rise in the Emirates, getting briefly back to normal in Riyadh.
Warren Buffett most famously said, you know, someone came up to him during the 2008 when the stock market went way down. He said, Mr. Buffett, you lost $10 million today. Portfolio. He said, I lose either. So, I don't value myself. It'll come back up. And then you'll say, Mr. Buffett, I'll be right. It just went up. That's it. Don't sell it.
I've not raised these with that Bank of Canada. Just issued a warning that if the tariffs happen, there will be no bounce back. The Canadian economy will be damaged. The Bank of Canada did some investments, and they said that Trump's tariffs will cut investments in the economy by 12% and Canadian exports by 8.5% in the first year alone. This is not good for the Canadian economy. What will also happen is our dollar will continue to decline. Even though those tariffs are put in place, some of the damage that's done to our economy will be slightly offset because of our dollar going down. And what I encourage all Canadians to do is to diversify your investments. If you have cash in your bank account, that cash, and I'm talking about, you know, a larger sum of money, let's say $15,000 plus, and those are your savings, you don't invest in anything else, you just like to have cash in your bank account.
with squad announcements, signings and build-up to the World Cup. Track your team's progress as we report on all major clashes. Go online or download the app now.
Including looking at ETFs and I hate to say it, but also
Donald Trump has become America's 42nd president. Join our team for the latest developments as Donald Trump returns to the White House. See the headlines as they happen in breaking news on the BBC app. And get in-depth coverage on bbc.com. Follow the story for all the latest with BBC News.
Hello and welcome to Focus on Africa, the place where real-time, in-depth and relatable stories matter with me, Wahid Omar, coming to you from Nairobi, where we unfold your discussion. Let's turn to our main headlines here. The UK Prime Minister heads to the White House for crucial talks with Donald Trump. The online influencer Andrew Tate and his brother have been allowed to leave Romania for the US despite facing charges of rape and human trafficking. We'll bring you all the latest on that major story. And the last year's fast approach to Europe and more. The big surprise at this year's awards will take you to some of the locations where it was filmed. Well, all that is coming up. Let's round up the score for today. First of all, Gavin is here. And Gavin, good afternoon. Yes, afternoon to Matthew. There's been much change in the F1 paddock for the upcoming season. Lewis Hamilton now, of course, driving with Ferrari. The man he replaced, Carlos Sainz, is top on the time sheet, so in the afternoon, testing in Bahrain for his new team, Williams. Hamilton posted the fastest lap, though, at the morning section ahead of George Russell's Mercedes, the seven-time world champion, taking advantage of a dry final hour leading up to the lunch break. You can follow all the latest over on the BBC Sport website and app. Reflecting on the Premier League midweek games now, Liverpool are 13 points clear out of win for Manchester United as well. Who beat Ipswich Town. It's in Alejandro Garnacho in the headlines today. He was substituted early on and headed straight to the changing room rather than the bench.
And you want to go have some soup with that?
Garnacho was substituted on 44 minutes an immediate reaction to Patrick Dorgan's red card.
I say we go have some soup, honey.
Went straight down the tunnel as United fans in Old Trafford appeared to
mushroom or whatever you want.
take the winger off.
The thinking was that we play more in the 5-3-1. I know that is a risk because we have to do
hello.
Now that we have 1 against 1 in both, and then we make the substitution. We have to choose someone to the out. We have to think about that since it goes
It's heavy.
What I'm saying is that I'm going to talk with Garnacho about that. So I will talk about this if you want in the next.
It's okay because I moved you and I put you and then
If they beat Leicester,
there's some way scale here.
Leicester
We can check, okay?
losing every game so far.
That's very heavy.
The Hammers come into the match after a surprise win at Arsenal at the weekend.
The opponent always got something to fight for, always got something to prove, always got some quality against you, and that's the case with Leicester. They'll be looking to turn their fortunes around. That's how football is. It's like, just when you think there's no way forward, always
You want the
something
way?
can come up.
Yeah, look at way 80.4, okay?
You got it cracks.
Not
Against
with
anything from
this. Tell me how much.
This minute.
How much is that?
With rain forcing the match to be abandoned in Rawalpindi without a ball being
No,
played.
it's
The second match in the city.
97.5.
87?
97.5.
97.5. How much was that?
Both Pakistan and Bangladesh
87.4?
eliminated from the tournament, having lost their opening 2 matches. Though Pakistan, the holders, will finish bottom of Group A.
You are 80?
A huge match to go on Friday after
It's
eliminating
only 17
England.
Really?
The Cricket World Cup champions. to beat Australia on their final group match of the competition to make it to the next
That's
round.
it.
Their captain Hashmatul
So, like,
Shahid believes that his team is up to the
You are
task.
90.4.
Yeah, because I'm the current. Tell me.
Australian team, and I know that he played really well in 2020,
100.
but that's part of the history.
112.
112? So 90?
We have 10 to
100, I'm at 22, right?
to come with a
90, 100?
And a shock at the Mexico Open of Tennis, World War II, Alex Zverev is out, beaten by teenager Leonard Tian in the second round. Tian knocked out Britain's Cameron Norrie in the first round and won this against Zverev in straight sets. Tian is the youngest American man to record a victory against
Okay, I still have a couple of things to put in it.
in 2001. And then we get all the latest on the BBC Sport website, Christian, but that is all the sport from us for now. Gavin, thanks very much indeed. Thank you. Now, the controversial social media influencer Andrew Tate and his brother Tristan have left Romania and are heading to the US on a private jet. The pair, who hold dual UK-US nationality, had their US passports returned to them by Romanian authorities. Both officials said charges of human trafficking against them, they started, have not been dropped. Our Central Europe correspondent Nick Thorpe reports now from Bucharest.
Andrew Tristan Tate's sudden dramatic departure from Romania is the latest twist in a tale which has made headlines across the world. First detained by Romanian police in December 2022, they face charges in Romania and are wanted in the UK. The charges they face include rape, trafficking and money laundering, all of which they deny. There have been many twists and turns in the prosecutor's case against them here in Romania. In June 2023, Andrew Tate was formally charged in Romania with rape, human trafficking and forming an organised crime group to sexually exploit women. In December 2023, the Tate brothers were ordered not to leave
I will
Romania
use this first,
after
okay?
they
I'll
made a
put
request
it
to
back
visit
later,
their
okay?
mother in hospital in the
My
UK.
shoes.
In
one.
May 2024, a civil case was brought against Andrew Tate in the UK by 4 women, alleging rape and assault, which he also denies. Yesterday, the Tate brothers had their passports returned, and today they're travelling to the US. Public and private pressure from the Trump administration on Romania, a key US ally in Europe, began soon after Donald Trump took office.
Donald Trump is the future of the Western world.
Andrew Tate strongly backed Trump for president. Lawyers in the UK, representing the women who accuse him of sexual violence, earlier urged Romania not to give in to US pressure.
To see the Trump administration lobbying for this man's release, interfering in due process in Romania, but worse, as far as we consider sitting here, interfering in due process here in the UK.
But the Tates flew out of Romania this morning with the blessing of the Romanian authorities after their US passports were returned to them. A short statement from the prosecutor's office this morning says that they are still under investigation and will be expected to return to Romania to face trial. But for now, their departure from Romania is sure to be seen as a major victory by their supporters and a major setback by their critics and accusers. Nick Thorpe, BBC News, Bucharest.
Well, the Romanian authorities say they accept a request from the Tate brothers to leave the country, but insist the Tates are still under investigation in Romania and the case against them has
And how much do you think I need for the airport to
I'll
go
ask for
tomorrow?
a while a lawyer for
300.
the civil
300,
cases
eh?
against
Even
the
if there's some
Tates in the
traffic.
UK.
Yeah.
I've been talking to them.
Maybe 200,
Here's what Matthew Jury
300
has said.
maximum.
It's
Yes,
not my
we
reaction,
will.
it's important, it's the victim's reaction, and they're just disgusted, dismayed, distraught. They don't understand how this could happen. Why would the so-called most powerful man in the world intervene on the behalf of one of the world's worst and most prolific alleged sex traffickers and rapists? They just don't understand it. They now feel that they've been completely abandoned, and that Tates will never see a criminal prosecution.
You refer to the most powerful man in the world, you mean Donald Trump?
I do mean Donald Trump, yes.
Are you clear that he's been involved in it?
I know the Trump administration has been involved, and given the power that Trump wields over his administration, one must think that it's come with a blessing.
What's the matter?
How could this have happened? Do you have an understanding of what the process has been, how this decision has been made?
Well, we know that in the last few weeks, the Trump administration has been bullying Romania to return Andrew Tate and his brother Tristan's passport and to allow them to travel to the US. Many commentators thought that would just never happen.
Is there a shit there?
But it has happened.
What shit?
Reports
What?
out that this morning that the Tate left on a private jet from Romania to the US, where they'll be
Everything,
landing
nobody,
to
nothing.
What does that mean for future prospects of the case that you're looking at?
It has no impact on
You're the one who forgot it.
by our clients.
Did you?
Prove it. But the concern is here.
I saw it already.
It's your word against mine.
It's
It's your word against mine.
Romania should be embarrassed.
It's your word against mine.
I think it's sensible to think.
What happened to my hair? It's I wanted
The big
water.
question now is, will they face justice in the UK? There is an
I want to
extradition
tell them
request
downstairs that
by
we're
the
leaving
UK
early.
authorities for the Tate's extradition to England. That request remains for Romania unapproved. A similar request must now be made to the US for their immediate extradition.
And do you think it's less likely that that will happen from the United States than it will be from Romania?
There is a treaty between the UK and US for extradition, but whether the Trump administration will honour that in the case of the Tates, I just don't know. Given the support that they've given the Tates to date, it's deeply concerning that they may not respect the international treaty, the extradition treaty between the UK and US in respect of extradition.
Well, that's the lawyer Matthew Jury talking to the BBC in the last little while. Let me actually show you the live pictures from Florida, from Fort Lauderdale. That's the airport where we're expecting in the next little while, no exact timings, but that is where the Tate brothers are expected to land relatively shortly. That's why the pictures are being sent by the agencies around the world. So we continue to watch, and of course this news coming as a major surprise early in the day when BBC sources confirmed that the Tate brothers were being allowed to leave Romania. And of course all those questions, both from the lawyer that we were just hearing about, but also our correspondent in terms of the case against them of what happens now. So we keep an eye on those pictures. Let me also tell you we are keeping an eye because we expect in the next little while as well to get a briefing, an update from the authorities after the death was announced of Gene Hackman and his wife at their home. So we are expecting to be updated in terms of the details from the authorities. So we're keeping our eye ready to take that to live here on BBC News. Around the world and across the UK, you are watching BBC News.
One thing I can say which is true of this region is that it's become harder to be a journalist. It's really important to be on the ground. If that means you've got to go to hostile, remote places, then we have to do that.
That's the opium resin. There's a very pungent smell of it in the air right now.
The Delta wave of COVID devastated India, and I think it was the coverage that we did for the BBC at the time which brought international attention.
What's happening there will affect the world's ability to recover from the pandemic.
We've met with families who've had to do the unthinkable. Another person came out and asked if we'd like to buy their child. The desperation is hard to put into words. Many of the stories we've had to tell are distressing, they're difficult, but that's usually an indicator that they're really important stories to tell.
You're watching BBC News, as I was showing you just a short while ago, the pictures from Fort Lauderdale, because we are expecting in the next few minutes there, the pictures on your screen, we are expecting that jet that's bringing the Tate brothers, Andrew and Tristan, back to the United States after they were allowed to leave Romania. We are expecting that in the next little while. So what we're going to do is continue with our other major stories, Sir Keir Starmer's visit, but leave those pictures there on the screen and return to that story when there is a development. But let's get more on our main story. Sir Keir Starmer there at the White House in the next couple of hours to meet President Trump, where he's expected, of course, to discuss trade and tariffs, the Middle East, while pushing for American security guarantees for Ukraine. Well, let's talk to our diplomatic correspondent, James Landale, who's here with me. James, what is your assessment of this meeting?
Well, when you talk about these kind of summits between British leaders and US presidents, there's always a risk that you become slightly hyperbolic, and we've all done this over the years, these many meetings that happens, and there's talk about the future of a special relationship and the nature of the transatlantic alliance, and there's a lot of analysis of the body language. But I think this meeting, it's, I think, reasonable to say that a huge amount is at stake, because we're not just talking here about the future of Ukraine. We're also talking here about the future of European security, because as well as Donald Trump making it very clear that he wants to have a quick ceasefire in Ukraine, potentially one that would be at Ukraine's cost, his administration have also made it very clear that they want to step back from their commitment to European security that we have thus far been used to in recent decades. How that manifests itself, we still don't know exactly.
Yes, and how Sir Keir Starmer tries to navigate a path, because we were listening to Donald Trump only yesterday, this time on the programme, and he ruled out any US security guarantees, which of course European...
He's quite ruled out. He sort of said by not very much.
And he said so Europe.
Yeah, but if the question is what does not very much mean for Donald Trump? The point is we don't know, and he might not know. I think what diplomats I think are going to try and do is to say, look, a quick ceasefire is fine, but if it then blows up in your face, the risk is that you, Donald Trump, own a disaster in Ukraine. In the same way that you, Donald Trump, try and blame what happened in Afghanistan and the fall of Kabul and the evacuation of Western forces, an equivalent sort of disaster will be hung around Mr. Trump's neck. That's the argument they're going to try and make. So therefore, it is in Donald Trump's interest for this ceasefire, if there is to be one, to be permanent, to be lasting. And that's why you need to have a backstop, US involvement in any security guarantee. And I think that's the way they're going to try and get it. But we simply don't know how that argument's going to land.
James, I'll be back to you in a second, but I want to bring in Ben Barry, who's Senior Fellow for Land Warfare at the International Institute for Strategic Studies. Welcome here to the programme. What do you think is the critical thing that the UK Prime Minister has to do here?
Well, I think the really important thing is he's got to persuade President Trump that the voices of Ukraine and the voices of key European countries like Britain and France should be in the negotiation. That, I think, must be his top priority.
In terms of the choreography this week, the lead up, the extra spending that was announced on defence, how important was that, do you think, in the lead up perhaps to the tougher conversations with the US President?
Well, I think it's very important. Any European leader that goes to see President Trump that can't produce a convincing worked out plan that their defence spending is going to match the NATO target and indeed be greater than that, is going to be in a very weak position. So it's unsurprising that the Prime Minister bit the bullet and made the hard decision he did, although many in the Armed Forces and Ministry of Defence would have liked to see the finances move more quickly. And this will increase his influence with the President and with the US Defence Secretary, and importantly, with the Pentagon. The other thing that I think the Prime Minister wants to get out of this is acknowledgements that once a ceasefire deal is arranged and signed and sealed and endorsed by the UN Security Council, that there is some sort of international force to reassure Ukraine by having some deterrent capability against Russia. And both Starmer and President Macron have clearly said that they think that's got to have US backup, the so-called backstop. Well, they've not been very clear about what that means, perhaps for understandable reasons.
How secure do you think the special relationship is? How secure do you think NATO is, Article 5, given everything we've seen in the last, 4 weeks?
Well, it's very uncertain. I mean, I think the events of the last couple of weeks will be as significant for Europe as, say, 9/11 was. Europe's defence has rested on the assumption of a full US commitment to NATO, so conventional forces for conventional deterrence and nuclear deterrence, both in the form of tactical nuclear weapons and ultimately the US strategic nuclear weapons. Now, all of that, of course, is at the gift of the President. And with the President's recent rhetoric, Secretary Hesketh's statements, and also what appears to be a strategic pivot in favour of Russia, both in the negotiations and in the US's voting behaviour at the General Assembly. If I was a European head of government, or indeed a defence minister or a chief of defence, I'd be extremely uncertain about whether the US were going to honour Article 5.
And Barry, we have to leave it there, but thank you for joining us on today's programme and those thoughts. Let me bring James back in, because we talk about security, we talk about Ukraine, but I suspect that a large part of the conversations, aside from the Middle East, will be about trade, about tariffs. Again, yesterday, the President mentioning 25% tariffs that he thinks are coming quite soon for the EU.
Yeah, and it was interesting, at a reception in Washington last night, Peter Mandelson, Lord Mandelson, Britain's ambassador, sort of cracked a joke about how important trade between the UK and the US was, and how wonderfully fair and balanced it was compared to other countries. Because essentially, Donald Trump has this prism through which he sees economic issues, namely balance of trade. And if he sees there's an imbalance, he wants to impose tariffs on it. And the risk for the British government is this: its strategic priority is economic growth, and the potential of huge tariffs on British goods trying to enter the American market would have an impact. But not only that, also Europe. If European goods are subject, as we expect will happen, Europe is also a huge market for the UK. That could have a knock-on effect on the British market. So I think the Prime Minister will have to make the argument, look, now is not the moment to weaken Europe's economy, not least if you want us to step up more on defence spending.
James, thanks. For now, we're about an hour and 10 minutes away from Keir Starmer arriving there at the White House. We'll talk to James again in the next hour of the programme as he takes us through what we see and what we hear from that meeting. Let's turn away from all of that for one more story this hour, because as we've been hearing, Hollywood is preparing for the biggest night of the year, the Oscars ceremony. It takes place on Sunday. Many are predicting that Anora, a dark fairy tale involving a sex worker in New York, will take home some of the top awards. But it's not just the film that's getting attention, so is its location, the Russian-speaking community of Brighton Beach in New York. And Tom Brooke went there to meet the film's location manager.
This man, location manager Ross Broder, is responsible for giving Anora a great sense of place. This story of Andy, a sex worker who marries the son of a Russian oligarch, a bittersweet tale of doomed romance, really highlights the New York Russian-speaking community of Brighton Beach, which lies some 15 miles from Manhattan on the Atlantic Ocean. Ross Broder found many of the key locations for the picture.
You take a look at Anora, and I think the locations are profoundly important. The mansion, Brighton Beach, the club where Annie works, they are a character in the story, and a lot of times the backdrop of a film informs you so much as to the life of the characters in the movie. Sean wanted to make sure that no matter what, we could get this block and be able to see the cyclone, and you know, it's just famous Coney Island.
This film wouldn't be what it is without Ross. He got me literally every single location I wanted. I'm waiting for you. He secured the mansion. He secured Tatiana's. He secured the wonderful candy shop that we shot at. I mean, literally, he got everything we needed.
Anora has many Russian-speaking characters. Brighton Beach, with its large Russian-speaking community, worked perfectly as a location. Sean Baker had long been wanting to set a film in this New York neighborhood.
I was shooting a fashion film there in 2021. I looked around and I said, you know what? I have to set my next film here. This is so beautiful.
With Ross Broder, I went to visit Tatiana, the Russian restaurant used in the picture.
Mushrooms, beef, cream, some onion, parsley. Pretty good. Really good.
Over a beef stroganoff lunch, we looked at sequences from Anora shot at locations that Ross had found.
Watch this here.
He then showed me a scene that meant a lot to him.
Here for Mr. Zakharov.
Ivan?
In the film, he has a small part portraying a security guard.
That's your moment of glory, right?
I have a couple little moments of glory.
Did they mind you shooting the air?
No, they didn't mind at all.
Ross told me it meant a lot to work as part of the cast, albeit in a modest role.
I love being a location manager, but it's fun to be in the movie and have a few lines and do some work with the actors. I love acting as well. So yeah, I was so appreciative that it threw me in there.
Anora has certainly brought iconic images of New York's Brighton Beach community to an international audience, and people who live here are pleased that the film was shot in the neighborhood. It's definitely given Brighton Beach some film tourism.
I came to Brighton Beach because we watched movie Anora not so long time ago. It really inspired me, and it was like a trip to New York City. I'm like, okay, the first stop should be Brighton Beach. Actually, we just flew here this morning.
To make a film on such a small budget and for it to resound so powerfully is a feat in of itself.
If Anora, as policymakers predict, does take home some Oscar trophies, it will bring the film to an even wider global audience, adding to the momentum that is making Ross Brothers' Brighton Beach locations a growing destination for film tourists from around the world. Tom Brooke, BBC News, New York.
Well, we're about to take a break, but let me just return to those shots from Florida, Fort Lauderdale, the airport there, because in the next little while we are expecting the Tate brothers to land in the US after being released, allowed to leave Romania, and also in the last hour, spokesperson for the brothers saying properties, vehicles, bank accounts and company shares have been returned to Andrew Tate and his brother Tristan after they were allowed to leave Romania. So plenty more on that story as it develops, and of course we will return to Washington, where Sir Keir Starmer will meet with Donald Trump in an hour's time. It's expected at the White House in 60 minutes' time, so we'll have live coverage in the build-up to that crucial meeting between Donald Trump and the UK Prime Minister. All of that is coming up here on today's Verified Live. Don't go away.
Hello there, as we head to the end of the week, most of North America is still mild and still dry as well. Lots of sunshine underneath this large area of high pressure. There is this fast-moving low pressure, this Alberta clipper, racing eastwards into eastern Canada. That's going to bring a spell of heavy snow around the Great Lakes up towards New England as well. And these areas are getting colder too. Let's move our way southwards into Mexico. We've got a few showers, and these still affecting eastern parts of the country, drifting a little bit further south. Maybe one or two more showers into Central America, but nothing particularly heavy here. However, we are going to see some very heavy rain continuing for west parts of Colombia into Ecuador and also into Peru. So some flooding again is quite likely. Also seeing some very heavy rain and frequent thunderstorms moving up into the River Plate and into Uruguay. That in turn could bring with it some flooding as well. Across Europe, it's generally drier and quieter. There's a bit of rain and sleetiness coming into eastern parts of Europe, a few showers perhaps into the southeast of Europe. Temperatures are going to be dropping in Iberia, and we've got some rain falling in the south of Spain and south of Portugal. That's going to be heading its way into Morocco as well, bringing in some colder air here too. But otherwise, northern parts of Africa should see temperatures recovering. Still got some heavy rain around Zambia. It is not quite as wet as it has been in Botswana, and there is a tropical cyclone close to southern parts of Madagascar. It's going to be very wet and very windy here. We've got some stronger winds blowing into the Gulf over the next couple of days, so some rough seas. Otherwise, the showers have moved away. Still quite cold air in place, although temperatures are tending to lift across much of the Middle East. The wet weather that we've seen in Afghanistan is going to be moving away, but still very wet for northern parts of Pakistan, the northwest of India too, and there'll be a lot of snow falling onto the Himalayas all the way into Nepal. More rain pushing into the far south of India as well as for Sri Lanka. Looking mostly dry though for Japan, and it's continuing to warm up a bit here as well. Getting particularly warm across many eastern parts of China in the next few days, and of course we've got a lot of heat in Southeast Asia. Then we hit those showers further south and more widely around Indonesia and southern parts of the Philippines. For most of Australia though, it's going to be dry and sunny. We've got some weak weather fronts running through the bight, just brushing across Tasmania. Only warm sunshine now across many parts of Australia, and some warm sunshine across New Zealand before the weekend sees a band of rain moving into the south. Goodbye.
Talking Movies is your ticket to all things film. Join us as we go beyond the screen with insider access you won't find anywhere else. From red carpets to the biggest film festivals, get behind-the-scenes insights into the most talked-about films, speaking directly to the creators and stars shaping the art of cinema. We celebrate the Hollywood hits and indie gems during award season. So grab your popcorn, get comfortable, and join me, Tom Brooke, for your front row seat to the world of film. Talking Movies, now showing on BBC News.
from London, this is BBC News. The UK Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer heads to the White House for crucial talks with Donald Trump.
I'm Katrina Perry at the White House, where the Prime Minister's visit comes as part of a concerted European effort to shore up support for Ukraine.
The online influencer Andrew Tate and his brother are due to arrive in Florida shortly after being allowed to leave Romania. The lawyer representing alleged victims in the UK say they're dismayed and distraught.
They just don't understand it. They now feel that they've been completely abandoned, and that Tates will never see a criminal prosecution.
And tributes pour in for the Hollywood star Gene Hackman, who's been found dead alongside his wife Betsy Arakawa in the US. Hello and welcome to today's Verified Live here on BBC News. Let me just tell you, we are keeping our eyes on that airport in Florida, in Fort Lauderdale, because we expect in the next few minutes the Tate brothers to arrive there in the US. There was that rather dramatic news at the start of the day, news that was unexpected, that the two brothers had been allowed to leave Romania, despite those charges that are facing them, allowed to leave. They got on a plane and they're heading to the US, and as I say, they're expected to land in Florida in the next little while. The Romanian authorities say those cases against them still stand. They expect the brothers to return at some stage. The thought is early March, but they have been allowed to leave the country, and as I say, they will land in the US, and there has been pressure from the US on Romania over the last few days for that release. Well, it has happened, and they got on a jet earlier today. We were seeing the pictures only a short while ago. They've actually disappeared, the live feed, the pictures from Fort Lauderdale, but we expect them to come back in the next few minutes, and we expect to be able to update you in terms of that arrival of Andrew Tate and his brother Tristan. So do stay with us. That story is developing here, and we'll bring you the latest movement in the next little while. Let's turn to the main event of the day, though. The UK Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer is expected at the White House in about an hour's time to meet with Donald Trump. European leaders are trying to persuade the US president to do more to support Ukraine. Well, trade and tariffs will also dominate, as well as the Middle East. Throw into the mix the unpredictability that comes with any sort of these set-piece events with Donald Trump, and you get an idea of how fascinating, how consequential the next couple of hours will actually be. So let's head to Katrina Perry. She's in Washington, and together we're going to take you through that live event in this program. And Katrina, this is a hugely important meeting, isn't it?
It really is, Matthew, not just for the United Kingdom, but also for Ukraine and for the European alliance, that transatlantic alliance between the US, UK and the countries of the EU and Ukraine. We've seen a concerted effort this week. We had the French President Emmanuel Macron here on Monday. Sir Keir Starmer is here today, and the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky will be here tomorrow. And it all stems from that concern amongst European leaders to a shift in American foreign policy, that President Trump and his administration appear to be softening their position towards Russia when it comes to its invasion of Ukraine. So we saw Macron here, and Sir Keir Starmer will do the same today. This effort to push the US to convince President Trump of the need for greater support for Ukraine, to not make concessions to Russia ahead of any peace negotiations beginning, and crucially, when there is a peace deal, that there would be a security backstop there. We've already heard France and the UK promise one of those, but they need the US, and President Zelensky is of this view as well, they need the US to provide security as well in any arrangement.
2 PMs for the price of one. The Prime Minister and Peter Mandelson, Ambassador to the United States, pressing the flesh at a reception at the British Embassy, wooing senior members of Donald Trump's administration, even risking a joke, not quite at the president's expense.
There's a real buzz around Washington right now. You can sense that there's a new leader in town, that is a true one-off, a pioneer in business and in politics. And you people love him. Others love to hate him. But to us, he's just Peter.
Despite tensions over Ukraine and trade, they came to praise Mr. Trump and lay it on thick about the importance of Britain's relationship with the US.
We are living through a very, very significant moment for our alliance between our two countries, and you have a leader in this country, in the president, who in my view is going to be a very consequential president for this country indeed.
And what the president decides about the war in Ukraine is top of the agenda for today's talks. He's offering Russia concessions to get a quick ceasefire, but the Prime Minister wants a US military backstop to guarantee Ukraine's security and protect Kiev's rooftops in the years ahead. He's hoping the promise of more UK defence spending and, yes, more lavish praise will get him a hearing from a president who says he won't make security guarantees beyond very much.
I'm here to meet another close friend of the United Kingdom, President Trump. And my message is really simple, that there is no more important relationship for the United Kingdom in defence, in security, in trade, in tech, in finance.
The Prime Minister also met business leaders, making the case for more trade with the US and investment in AI, despite Mr. Trump's promise to impose 25% tariffs on British goods.
We want to strike a new partnership. We share the view that our best days lie ahead. And, you know, taking out a chainsaw isn't quite my style. But we are stripping away red tape and bureaucracy.
Thus the warm words and unctuous diplomacy at the start of Sir Keir's visit. The hard talking comes later, on which much depends. James Landell, BBC News.
A little earlier, I spoke to Michael Martins. Now, he worked at the US State Department under President Trump, President Biden, and President Obama, indeed. And I asked him how well he thinks Sir Keir Starmer's diplomatic efforts have been received so far.
I think Starmer's done a good job of softening the ground. You know, coming out with the defense spending increase and, you know, talking about investment into the U.S. from UK businesses, and at the same time, you know, he's coming with his ask. He's asking for an American hard power guarantee in Ukraine post ceasefire, and I think that's going to be a big ask, because I think President Trump instinctively is going to be opposed to it. I think he's going to be focused more on economic deterrence and trying to make it easier for American companies to access Ukrainian markets, and using that as a different type of deterrence that doesn't involve American military.
We saw President Macron, when he was here on Monday, try to make the same ask to President Trump. And President Trump, in the meantime, has repeated his point that he doesn't want to see US troops there. So how big of an ask is it for Sir Keir Starmer to try again today?
I think it is a pretty big ask, but I think Starmer has done a good job of kind of avoiding a pitfall that Macron fell into, which was telling President Trump that he's making a mistake. I think the fastest way to get President Trump to do something is to tell him that it's a mistake. Whereas Starmer has focused much more on the relationship itself and trying to show that there are other ways of doing it that will benefit America too. And you know, Starmer's walking a bit of a tightrope, as you mentioned, with potentially incoming tariffs and things like that. But I do think the approach that he's taking, in the form of whether it be flattery or a bit more transactionalism, and also importantly what he's not saying, he's not coming in and talking about Israel-Palestine and those type of things. I think that's going a longer way than Macron's approach.
So Sir Keir Starmer will be here in just about an hour's time. It's raining reasonably heavily here in Washington, D.C. So we saw Macron walk earlier in the week. I suspect we may see Sir Keir Starmer drive. He'll come up this driveway here behind me and over to the covered entrance on into the West Wing, into the Oval Office, to meet President Trump there. About an hour from now, they'll have a brief press moment in the Oval Office. They'll take some questions from members of the media at that point. Then us reporters will be booted out. They'll have their bilateral meeting. They're also going to have lunch together, and then they'll have a press conference, a formal press conference, where again they'll take a lot of questions from the assembled journalists. I can tell you there is huge media interest in this meeting today, journalists from across America and also right around the world as well, and we will bring all of that to you live here on BBC News. But for now, back over to you, Matthew.
Katrina, thanks for taking us through it. Exactly as Katrina says, even that first burst of pictures and comments, given what we've seen from Donald Trump in recent days, that can be quite elongated. So it gives you a real sense, even early on, the thoughts of the US President and the early thoughts from the UK Prime Minister. So do stay with us here on the programme and you won't miss a beat of that. But through the course of the day already, as we build up to this meeting, we've had the opportunity here at the BBC to speak to a number of former UK ambassadors and diplomats about what we can expect in this first Starmer-Trump meeting, what advice they would give to the Prime Minister about what the UK can uniquely bring to Trump's table. Have a listen.
Every single country in the world has a special relationship with the United States because the United States is the most important country in the world. But the case for the UK is stronger than for most. It goes back into history, but for this president, it's also quite personal. His mother was born in Stornoway. He clearly loves Scotland. He loves golf in Scotland. And one of the highlights of his first presidency was the state visit to Buckingham Palace with the late Queen in 2019. You are right, the royal family is a card that only Keir Starmer can play.
It's a very long and important agenda, and you're dealing with a very different kind of president who has come bounding in and has sent shockwaves around the world, doing a lot of things that he said he would do. Some people thought he didn't mean it, but it looks like he did. And so British Prime Minister arriving this week after Macron and before President Zelensky, who seems to be going tomorrow, has got a very substantial agenda. And as you rightly say, it's extremely important that he establishes the right personal relationship with this president, because this is an administration where whatever the rest of them may think or say or tell us, it is the top man who decides on the policy, sometimes at a whim. But he is the man who takes the decisions, and therefore he's the person that Keir Starmer's got to get to know.
I think Keir Starmer has a really good starting point here. He can talk about how focused he is on looking at European capability to shore up security and stability in Europe in the future. But I think either way, whichever way that discussion goes, whether we get some clarity, whether we get some more favourable signals on the United States' commitment to Ukraine's security and sovereignty in the future, or whether we don't, it's the right thing for Europeans to be looking urgently at their own deterrent capacity, understanding that the situation requires very close cooperation between European powers, and taking a very rapid look at where they have that capacity already and what more they need to be credible participants in upholding Ukraine's sovereignty and independence, and in so doing upholding European security in the future.
Well, I've also been talking to Alistair Campbell, former Director of Communications for Tony Blair, who himself sat in on at least a dozen presidential meetings, and asked him about the do's and don'ts of today's meeting.
Well, I think that we always said that he's dealing with a president, frankly, like no other that has gone before, and actually very different even to the one that Donald Trump was in his first term. Much more nationalistic in the way that he expresses himself, much more bullish, much more aggressive, I think much more confident. And I think in terms of do's, be very, very clear about the messages that you want to land with him, insofar as possible, make them the same messages that you're landing with the public, and be very, very clear about what you want the impression to be upon him and on the broader public. And I think as your previous interviewee was saying, I think Keir Starmer has set that up very, very well. I think everybody around the world wants their leader every now and again to have the sort of Hugh Grant Love Actually moment when you stand alongside the President of the United States and lay into him. That is definitely a don't. That is absolutely a don't. And I agree again with Matthew, who was just speaking there. I thought President Macron got the balance just about right between, if you like, the flattery and the demands.
But he did fact check him. He did fact check him at one stage,
well, I think,
and understand that? Is that important if the same thing happens again where he says things that are not factually true? It's interesting because what Macron fact-checked him about, he repeated in that first cabinet meeting yesterday. So if the same sort of scenario arises, what should Sir Keir Starmer do?
Well, this is why it's so difficult to deal with Donald Trump, because that you're right that President Macron corrected him on that specific thing. The fact is, a journalistic fact checker could probably have found 10 things before that you could have fact checked on. I think it has to be, I'll go back to the point I made earlier. If it relates to one of the very key points that you're going to be trying to make to the public, then I think it's worth doing. I wouldn't do it necessarily by grabbing the guy's hand or grabbing the guy's thigh or whatever. But I think, for example, the way that Macron talked about Russia being the aggressor, he didn't say, and by the way, Donald, you keep going on about Ukraine caused this war. They didn't. He didn't do that. What he kept saying, the aggressor was Russia. I think there are ways of doing this. On the podcast I did with Rory Stewart, we interviewed recently Kevin McCarthy out in Davos, and he's somebody who obviously knows Donald Trump and how to deal with Donald Trump very, very well. He did make an interesting observation. He said, you can say things to Donald Trump's face, and he will register them, and he might not take offence. He does take offence, and he will bridle. But if you say things to his face in public that he takes to be undermining of him or his position, then he takes it very, very badly. So it's a question of how you express your own view and your own national interest. But I think as long as you make it clear you're standing up for your own national interest, you can go a long way.
Quick couple of questions in terms of how to calibrate what you're asking for. So we know that Sir Keir Starmer, among other European leaders, pushing for greater US security guarantees. Again, yesterday in that cabinet meeting, he ruled that out. He said that's for Europe. Do you ask for that, even though you think you know the answer? And similarly, a second thought about, the Brits love to talk about the special relationship. It has been important for generations, but is it still a special relationship? I think it's the 10th leader that Trump is seeing.
Look, I would say that on the first, do you point it out? I go back to the point I made earlier. You state what your position is. You talk about why it matters to Ukraine and to the whole of Europe and to the wider world if Putin is allowed to think, or to the public to think that he's won this war. You state why it's important that those security guarantees matter. If you go in there and say, listen, you're the big guy, you're supposed to be looking after the little guys, then that's not going to work. So I think it's a question of stating your position. And then the point about the special relationship, I think I think the Americans sometimes feel that we're a little bit needy about this. But I think right now, if you look at the list of countries that are in a special position, the UK is one of them, in part because we are a leading European defence power. And also, I think it's not, there's no point banging on about it. Donald Trump's not going to be that impressed if you go on about how much he loved the Queen and how much he loves playing golf at Turnberry. The hard facts of this are what matter. And I think somehow getting it into Donald Trump's head that he sees himself as this great strong leader, this is a place where real strength means standing up for values, for principles that America and the UK have had together for a very long time.
A final thought then, what leverage, what cards do you think the UK Prime Minister really has? And then when you see what's happened in the last month, that we haven't seen Donald Trump in any way criticising or standing up to Vladimir Putin. We have seen him pick fights with Ukraine, with Canada, with Greenland, with European leaders. Do you understand why he is doing that, why that approach is the one that's been adopted, and what it actually means for the rest of the West?
Well, he is upending lots of the norms and lots of the conventions and lots of the world order that we sort of took for granted. And he's doing it in a very Trumpian way. He is literally breaking things to see what then emerges. Do I understand why he's doing it? I think I can't claim to be anywhere near inside his head, but I think that partly he wants people to understand that he is the most powerful man in the world. He wants people to understand that he has decided to be a massive disruptor in the world, and he has decided that those norms and conventions have got to go. Now we have to argue for the parts of that we want to hold on to. And I think it will make a difference the fact that Keir Starmer has stood up in Parliament and said we're going to be increasing defence spending. Lots of us have been arguing for that for some time. I think, a little bit of humility around that and saying, we should have done this earlier. We shouldn't have realised that, this relationship was changing. But I think then there is so much else that can be brought to bear in terms of talking about, I wouldn't do it in a sort of cliched way. It's about day-to-day interaction between business, the way that our intelligence communities work together, the way that our militaries have worked together so much, the cultural ties that bind us together. And I actually think this is a massive, massive challenge for Keir Starmer today, but it's also a huge opportunity, because this is when, these are moments when statecraft and leadership really define people's premiership. And so, the next few hours, there is a chance that this will define the UK government and the success of that government for some time to come.
Well, let's show you the live pictures from Florida, because that jet, it is on the tarmac. We were just telling you a short while ago that we were expecting the jet carrying Andrew and Tristan Tate that had set off this morning from Romania to land in Florida. It appears to have landed. Slightly unclear, as we're looking at these pictures, whether the brothers are still on board or have disembarked. I suspect it is the latter, but just the camera moving in, difficult to make out actually what that actually is. But as I say, the rather surprising news that started the day, which was that Andrew and Tristan Tate had been allowed by the authorities in Romania to leave the country. They, of course, were arrested 3 years ago in Romania. They faced trial on allegations of rape, of trafficking minors and money laundering. The Romanian authorities saying that case is still active and they expect the brothers to return, we think, early March, but we will see if that actually happens. And of course, in the last few days, the Americans have been applying pressure on Romania to allow the brothers to actually leave, and that is exactly what has happened. What happens next? Well, that really is an open question, with, of course, the lawyers for some of the alleged victims here in the UK talking about how those people have been speaking to him, saying they're distraught at today's developments, and we'll play you that interview in the next little while. So those are the pictures live from Florida with the jet on the ground. Around the world and across the UK, you are watching BBC News. You're watching BBC News. Let me take you back to those live pictures that are coming to us from Florida, Fort Lauderdale, with that jet now on the ground after apparently bringing Andrew and Tristan Tate from Romania to the US after their surprise release earlier in the day, with the Romanian prosecutors agreeing to let them leave, but they are expected to return to face those proceedings. As I say, rape, trafficking minors and money laundering, all the offences they are accused with. And of course, here in the UK, there are alleged victims that are bringing criminal cases and civil cases. Well, their lawyer, Matthew Jury, has been talking to the BBC in the last few hours, talking about the shock of the people he represents in terms of reaction to today's developments.
It's not my reaction that's important, it's the victim's reaction, and they're just disgusted, dismayed, distraught. They don't understand how this could happen. Why would the so-called most powerful man in the world intervene on the behalf of one of the world's worst and most prolific alleged sex traffickers and rapists. They just don't understand it. They now feel that they've been completely abandoned, and that takes will never see a criminal prosecution.
You refer to the most powerful man in the world, you mean Donald Trump?
I do mean Donald Trump, yes.
Are you clear that he's been involved in this?
I know the Trump administration has been involved, and given the power that Trump wields over his administration, one must think that it's come with his blessing.
How could this have happened then? Do you have an understanding of what the process has been, how this decision has been reached?
Well, we know that in the last few weeks that the Trump administration has been bullying Romania to return Andrew Tate and his brother Tristan's passport and to allow them to travel to the US. Many commentators thought that that would just never happen because it was just so absurd, but it has happened. The reports are that this morning that the Tates left on a private jet from Romania to the US, where they'll be landing shortly.
What does that mean for the future prospects of the case that you're looking to bring?
It has no impact on the civil proceedings being brought by our clients. That will go ahead. But the concern is here that there will be no criminal prosecution of the Tates for their alleged crimes. I don't think they'll ever face justice in Romania now. I think Romania should be embarrassed and ashamed for having let them leave. I think it's fanciful to think that they'll return. The big question now is, will they face justice in the UK? There is an extradition request by the UK authorities for the Tates extradition to England. That request remained to Romania unapproved. A similar request must now be made to the US for their immediate extradition.
And do you think it's less likely that that will happen from the United States than it would have been from Romania?
There is a treaty between the UK and US for extradition, but whether the Trump administration will honour that in the case of the Tates, I just don't know. Given the support that they've given the Tates to date, it's deeply concerning that they may not respect the international treaty, the extradition treaty between the UK and US in respect of extradition.
Well, that's Matthew Joey, the lawyer for some of the UK alleged victims. Let me just take you back to the live pictures in Florida, because as we've seen, the plane is on the ground with the helicopter shots just being supplied to us, coming in live from the BBC. But I'll take you from that to another set of cameras and shots that are now being set up, because we think that Andrew and Tristan Tate are off the plane, and the cameras just trained at one of the main exits to see if they appear there and their first comments after being allowed to travel to the UK. You were just hearing from some of the UK women who've been talking to their lawyer, their shock at today's developments, and of course the Romanians saying that they will press ahead with the rape, the trafficking minors charges, and the money laundering that those charges that face those two brothers. I'll be back with more next up here in the next couple of minutes. It's time for all the day's business news, and Ben Thompson is here. So I'll see you in a bit as we build up to Keir Starmer's visit to the White House.
Hello there. Across the Middle East, whilst it's turning dry, it's still quite cold for many for this time of the year, but there could be a few changes over the coming few days. We'll have a look at that in just a moment. Across Northern Africa, for the most part, it's dry, except in the northwest around Morocco, where we're going to find some cooler, wetter weather here, not just on Friday, but into the weekend as well. Seasonal range much further south, of course, and whilst it's not as wet in Botswana, it's going to be very wet in Zambia, and we have a tropical cyclone close to the far south of Madagascar that's going to bring some very wet and very windy weather here. Also got still a number of thunderstorms affecting eastern parts of South Africa, and that could continue to plague Joburg over the coming few days. There may even be a little bit of rain in Cape Town to start the weekend, and then it gets much warmer here. Some colder air in place though in Morocco, chance of some rain from time to time. The temperatures across many other parts of Northern Africa are tending to lift. Still quite chilly though for this time of the year around the Middle East. The showers that we've had cleared away by Friday, so it is looking dry and sunny on the whole. But we're going to find stronger winds continuing into Friday around the Gulf, so that means some rough seas here. And there are a few showers coming into the Mediterranean, could come into coastal areas on Saturday before they then fade away. Temperatures continuing to rise in the Emirates, getting briefly back to normal in Riyadh.
Actors are players. To kind of make an actor special, put marks by an actor. No. Actors are it should be universal. There was nothing in my background that was special. I was an East End boy. You know, I was never called Blimey, but that was my surroundings, you know. But I was born to be an actor. That's what I feel. There was never any alternative. That's what I wanted. That's what I thought I could do. That's what I enjoyed. And it was the giving of an act. I can't act on my own. I need somebody to act to hopefully have an impact on your life as an audience.
Join Americast as we navigate the biggest news and politics in the US.
With lively chats about what's happening in America and social media investigations.
Travel to the heart of America. With Americast, listen wherever you get your BBC podcasts.
In the world of business, everything is connected. From global hubs to places less traveled. The big stories to your bottom line. The path can be unpredictable. But with the right insights, you can see where the bend in the road will lead. Business on BBC News. Make the connection.
On BBC News, the latest business news from across the globe. Business Today.
Piling on the pressure. President Trump says tariffs on Mexico and Canada will come into effect next week with an extra 10% hike for China. UK Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer is in Washington hoping to find common ground with President Trump at the White House, with trade high on the agenda. A green light for Gatwick. The UK government gives London's Gatwick Airport approval to expand. And the enduring lure of Ash and Pikachu. We speak to the boss of Pokemon 29 years after the game's first release. Hello, welcome. This is Business Today. I'm Ben Thompson. Now, US President Trump is wielding the threat of more trade tariffs as he continues his push to prioritise American jobs and exert political pressure on key trading partners. On social media, Mr. Trump has said that tariffs on Mexico and Canada will take effect next week. Then he's floated an additional 10% tariff on all goods from China. He's blaming what he calls the ongoing flow of drugs across America's borders, much of which President Trump says is made in China. Meanwhile, the European Union faces a potential 25% tariff on all imports, which it vows to fight. Economists warn that tariffs could fuel inflation. Let's talk to Michelle, who's given an eye on all this for us from New York. Michelle, it's another day and another threat of more tariffs, and that's the point, isn't it, here? It's a threat, and President Trump trying to use this to exert political influence.
Well, I mean, he's clarified the implementation date. There had been some confusion after his first cabinet meeting when Donald Trump sort of said that potentially April 2nd was the date. And I think the thing to remember here is there are a couple of deadlines that people need to be paying attention to. March 4th, which is next week, is when the tariffs on Mexico and Canada are due to go into effect. That is also, according to Donald Trump's Truth Social post this morning, when an additional 10% tariffs on China will also come into effect. April 2nd, that second date I mentioned, that is when reciprocal tariffs are due to take effect. And the assumption is, yesterday in that cabinet meeting, that is when Donald Trump for the first time mentioned that Europe, the EU, could face 25% tariffs. It's assumed that will go into effect around that time, although that wasn't specified, so it is sort of still up in the air. The question is, how much room is there for the countries subject to these tariffs to negotiate? In the case of Canada, there has been some confusion because Donald Trump has talked about this being about the amount of fentanyl that's coming across the border. Well, the sums or the quantities coming from Canada into the US are significantly smaller than the amounts coming across the border from Mexico. Also, as you may recall, when we started talking about tariffs, Canada said it was introducing a sort of fentanyl czar to try and address this issue. And you also saw Claudia Sheinbaum in Mexico saying they were sending 10,000 more troops to the border. How much more will it take to placate the president? It's not clear, but obviously the next few days ahead of that deadline could be key.
And Michelle, all the while, the warnings that these tariffs could push up inflation remain true. A lot of concern about, imposing all these extra costs on anything that's imported into the United States means that for everyday consumers in America, they will pay more.
So, how tariffs work, you're right, Ben, is that it's an import duty. So if you are an American manufacturer, maybe making bicycles, for example, in the United States, you might be importing a part from China that goes into the bike. You will then have to pay that higher cost. And then the question is, do you absorb it or do you pass it on to consumers? And that's why economists say that it can be ultimately inflationary. The question is how much. I think we don't really know at this point. It all depends on how much the cost gets passed on. But you're starting to see it affect sentiment. If you look at the Conference Board's Consumer Confidence Index this week, it was already showing a decline. There was a Harris poll also showing that voters are split as to the effects, the benefits and harms of tariffs.
Okay, Michelle, good stuff. Thank you. Keep us posted. Michelle Flory there live in New York. Now, amid that threat of a global trade war, the UK Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, has arrived in Washington. He's due at the White House in the next hour or so, where he will meet President Donald Trump. Well, the talks are expected to focus heavily on security. Now, on Tuesday, the Prime Minister announced an increase in the UK's defence spending, marking a big shift in strategy. But there's also the looming threat of those tariffs, of course, as the EU now knows all too well, and possible future UK-US trade deal that needs to be discussed. So let's speak to Yael Selfie, who's Chief Economist at KPMG UK. Yael, always good to have you here. And what's your assessment about the priorities of this meeting? Because it seems there's a lot for them to discuss. Where will the priority be in terms of what Keir Starmer needs to discuss first?
Well, I think defence is probably the first item on the agenda because the UK has a big role in that within Europe, and also because UK is not directly under threat when it comes to the tariff. At this stage, we have a surplus. We mainly trade in services with the US, so we're not, at least at the moment, under any immediate threat of tariffs. Having said that, we would be affected indirectly through the impact on other trading partners.
Now, there's a lot of talk about a UK-US trade deal. It strikes me that, what we're seeing from the White House right now and the Trump administration is not very encouraging, one might say, when it comes to establishing a trade relationship with the UK, given what we're seeing in terms of tariffs on other key trading partners, be they Mexico, Canada, China, or indeed the European Union.
Yeah, I mean, I would find it fairly surprising if this is where things were heading at this stage, and ultimately one needs to think about the broader trade relationships that the UK has. The US is a very important trading partner for the UK, but also the EU, and being able to balance the two will be extremely important for the Prime Minister.
How do you expect he will see this as what is a win for the Prime Minister in this meeting? How will he sell this back home?
I think a huge win would be to get some commitment in relation to defense in Europe, to be able to get the US not completely disengaged with defense, the defense of Europe and engagement in NATO. That would be very significant.
Yeah, always good to talk to you. Thanks very much, yourself in there with the details on what we may expect from that meeting that gets underway in about an hour or so from now. Here in the UK, a second runway at Gatwick Airport has been backed by the UK government, provided it puts measures in place to reduce noise. The Transport Secretary, Heidi Alexander, says she's minded to approve the regular use of what is currently an emergency runway. But there is strong opposition, with some lawmakers, local authorities and residents all pushing back, something that's delayed airport expansion in the UK before our competitors in Europe have moved forward. That's something transport analyst Alexander Patterson told me was holding the UK back.
You know, this is of course why Britain has struggled for economic growth for the last 15 or more years. Gatwick is a very successful airport. It is running very close to its peak capacity. It is the world's busiest single runway airport. So they have drawn everything they can out of what they've got. They now need to expand. If they can do that, that will help businesses nearby, which are reliant on that airport to get their customers in, to get some of their suppliers in, to go and visit new customers. And adding it will, of course, boost growth.
Now, excuse me, if you grew up in the 1990s, this might make you feel even older than you do already. Pokemon, it seems, is 29 years old. Pokemon, short for Pocket Monster, has become a global media giant with everything from trading cards and video games, blockbuster movies and soft toys. But what is the secret to its success? Our very own Pikachu, Marika Oi, caught up with the Pokemon boss.
I believe the original game was groundbreaking because it allowed users to exchange Pokemon that you catch with your friends and other players. So it wasn't an introverted activity, but it became a tool to actively communicate with others. The number of Pokemon, which started at 151, has increased to more than 1,000 today, and their fans also grew and now span across several generations. Our mission statement is to enrich both the real world and the virtual world with the Pokemon characters. Pokemon Go is the perfect example, because you can look for Pokemon in the real world.
What about counterfeits and patent infringement? You recently sued the maker of the hit survival adventure game Palworld. What are you doing about those fake Pokemon?
We've been fighting fakes since the beginning. The more popular Pokemon became, the worse the problem. It affects our creativity, and our customers get disappointed when they receive products that aren't authentic.
But that's not their only challenge. I'm at one of 24 Pokemon centers where they sell toys, stationeries, cards, you name it. But there's a separate resale market where Pokemon cards change hands at astronomical price tags. Influencer Logan Paul currently holds the Guinness World Record for the most expensive Pokemon trading card, which he bought for more than $5 million.
If the cards are rare or seen as vintage, their value goes up. But it's not our place to say that they are not valuable. To us, the true value of Pokemon is to play, have fun, and communicate with friends.
Along with Hello Kitty and Super Mario, Pokemon is one of Japan's 3 big soft power. And the Pokemon Company is the only one that remains private despite its huge revenue.
Hello Kitty is one of the characters for Sanrio, and Super Mario is one of the characters for Nintendo. But Pokemon is the only thing we do with the Pokemon Company. So whatever profit we make from Pokemon gets reinvested in Pokemon. If we go public, we have to focus on growing our profitability, and our investors might ask, what are you going to do when the popularity of Pokemon dies down? And our answer will be, we'll go bust when Pokemon is no longer popular.
I've got some questions from my kids who are big Pokemon fans. There have been some controversies over the decision to retire Ash, or Satoshi in Japanese. They want to know what happened to him in his retirement.
That's the hardest question you asked today. Well, Ash and Pikachu's journey might have ended on camera, but it's only what you see on TV. Even though the TV camera might not be following them, Ash's journey is continuing, and his partner Pikachu is right next to him.
I've got to catch them all. In other news for you, shares in Rolls-Royce have jumped over 15% in early trading on the back of the group's full-year results. UK aerospace company announced underlying profits were up 55% last year on strong demand for its jet engines. Rolls-Royce upgraded its outlook and declared a $1.2 billion share buyback. In the UK, more young people were not in employment, education or training, so-called NEETs, at the end of last year than the 10 point in the last 11 years. The latest Office for National Statistics figures show nearly 1 million 16 to 24-year-olds fell into those categories between October and December of last year. It's almost 1 in every 7 people in that age range. More on all those
stories for you. bbc.com/business is where you will find it. But stay with us here on BBC News. That is your business at BBC.
This is the game changer scene. Look, it even comes with binoculars. Donald Trump has become America's 47th president. Join our team for the latest developments as Donald Trump returns to the White House. See the headlines as they happen with breaking news alerts on the BBC app. And get in-depth coverage on bbc.com. Follow the story for all the latest with BBC News. When the weather can't make up its mind, we can help you make up yours. Check on BBC Weather.
I'm going to lecture you on climate change. Have you considered resigning over this? Because you're clearly embarrassed.
Of course, I have been, I have thought about this.
We have now the best or most sophisticated information technology in history, and people are no longer able to talk with each other or to agree on the most basic fact.
I want to be totally honest with you, and I am being honest with you.
At least this should be a common ground for everyone. We should defend international law.
In the spirit of your title of Hard Talk, you're completely wrong.
I'm not offended, but I want to hear why.
Completely wrong.
Hard Talk on BBC News.
Welcome back to BBC News. I'm going to take you straight live to Florida because we've been seeing the live pictures over the last 45 minutes. These are the pictures at just one of the exits of the airport there after the Tate brothers landed back in the US after that surprise release from Romania earlier in the day with the camera crews all set, ready to catch a view of Andrew and Tristan Tate if they emerge. Where I saw a car with some security just to the left of these pictures, all ready to whisk those brothers away. Of course, the pair hold dual UK and US nationality. They had their American passports returned to them by Romanian prosecutors. Officials said charges of rape and human trafficking against them, which they deny have not been dropped. Well, these are the live pictures. Let's try to rewind because it's been such a fast-moving development throughout the course of today on this story. Our correspondent in Bucharest, Nick Thorpe, takes us through it.
Andrew and Tristan Tate's sudden dramatic departure from Romania is the latest twist in a tale which has made headlines across the world. First detained by Romanian police in December 2022, they face charges in Romania and are wanted in the UK. The charges they face include rape, trafficking and money laundering, all of which they deny. There have been many twists and turns in the prosecutor's case against them here in Romania. In June 2023, Andrew Tate was formally charged in Romania with rape, human trafficking and forming an organised crime group to sexually exploit women. In December 2023, the Tate brothers were ordered not to leave Romania after they made a request to visit their mother in hospital in the UK. In May 2024, a civil case was brought against Andrew Tate in the UK by 4 women, alleging rape and assault, which he also denies. Yesterday, the Tate brothers had their passports returned, and today they're travelling to the US. Public and private pressure from the Trump administration on Romania, a key US ally in Europe, began soon after Donald Trump took office.
Donald Trump is the future of the Western world.
Andrew Tate strongly backed Trump for president. Lawyers in the UK, representing the women who accuse him of sexual violence, earlier urged Romania not to give in to US pressure.
To see the Trump administration lobbying for this man's release, interfering in due process in Romania, but worse, as far as we consider sitting here, interfering in due process here in the UK.
But the Tates flew out of Romania this morning with the blessing of the Romanian authorities after their US passports were returned to them. A short statement from the prosecutor's office this morning says that they are still under investigation and will be expected to return to Romania to face trial. But for now, their departure from Romania is sure to be seen as a major victory by their supporters and a major setback by their critics and accusers. Nick Thorpe, BBC News, Bucharest.
Well, keep an eye on that story. Obviously, there's live pictures from Florida. If there's an update, we'll obviously return to it. Let's turn to a fascinating case in the High Court here in London, which has refused to order a 14-year-old boy to be returned to Britain from Ghana. The teenager had brought a case himself against his own parents. He said he was tricked by them into going to boarding school there. His lawyers told the court he was at risk of harm if he stayed, but his parents argued he was at risk of being drawn into criminal activity in London. Well, Sandra Berg, our correspondent, is here in the studio. Sandra, a fascinating case this. Tell me a little more then about why the parents sent him to Ghana.
Well, Ghana, because the family were originally from Ghana. The parents were born there, moved here as young adults, but the children, the boy, whom the boy was the youngest, were all born and brought up in London. So for the boy, London was his home. He was tricked, as you said in the queue, into going to Ghana in the first place, told that a relative was gravely ill. The whole family went. Then he was told he would be staying in boarding school. Very unhappy there. He emailed everyone he could think of, including the British High Commission, begging them to help, and managed to make contact with some specialist lawyers who he was able then to instruct to bring a case to the High Court. Now, his lawyers argued that he was at risk of serious harm if he stayed in Ghana, and his parents argued that actually the risk was greater in London. And as he was saying, the judge, Mr. Justice Hayden, found it in favour of the parents and said, as he did so, that it was a sobering and somewhat depressing conclusion that the boy was safer in Ghana, some 3,000 miles away from the town he considered his home, than he would be in London. So the boy's lawyer has, of course, spoken to him, and he got his reaction. He was very disappointed, he told us. James Netter.
It's come as a real shock to him. He's been faced in an invidious situation like this. He's considering his next steps carefully. He and I are talking about things very carefully along with our other barristers on this team. In terms of his reaction to the judgment, he was obviously incredibly disappointed, incredibly upset. He has sought protection from the courts because of the situation his parents have put him in taking him to Ghana and deceiving him and travelling to Ghana.
Sandra, how many cases like this are there?
Well, we don't know exactly how many cases like this there are. As you know, perhaps family courts have only recently subjected themselves to transparency, which makes them easier for us as journalists to report. So we have fairly limited information, but when it comes to cases like this, James Netter, the lawyer, says he has quite a few cases of this nature where he's contacted by young people who've been sent, usually deceived, tricked by their families and sent to boarding schools, often in Africa, sometimes in Southeast Asia, South Asia, and they're contacting him because they're desperate to try to come back. And he can put the legal team together to represent them in the High Court. And while they were not successful today, he says usually he's successful in these cases.
Sandra, thanks very much for bringing us up to date on that case. Thank you. Well, we're about to take a break, but as we edge up to 5 o'clock, I want to take you back to the White House, the main event of the day, because there you see the photographers all ready to catch the pictures that you will see on your newspapers tomorrow. And that's, of course, when Keir Starmer arrives there at the White House, this crucial meeting with Donald Trump. So much for the leaders to discuss, but Keir Starmer going with that message that other European leaders have talked about, which is to support Ukraine and to perhaps persuade the president for more US security guarantees. Trade, of course, the Middle East, of course, they will be talking about that as well. So Keir Starmer will go in a couple of minutes' time, we are told. They then will meet, and then you'll see those pictures that we have become used to in the Oval Office, the two leaders, the first pictures in there, the first comments from the two leaders to the journalists who are in that room, and then they will have private discussions, and after that they are due to have a news conference. So a really consequential couple of hours ahead, because there are so many absolutely crucial issues. President Zelensky, of course, is in Washington tomorrow for that meeting with the president, and that minerals deal that we expect to be signed, that comes tomorrow. We saw President Zelensky get on his jet heading to Washington a little earlier. But that is the meeting tomorrow. Today's meeting is with the UK Prime Minister. I think he's the 10th world leader to meet Donald Trump. Theresa May, of course, in his first term, was the first leader he met. But he goes there with very clear messages. So we will watch the programme. Katrina Perry is there at the White House. She will take us through that meeting. So Katrina, you've got a couple of minutes to get yourself totally ready. We'll be back with more here on BBC News of that meeting here in a moment or two. Don't go away.
Hello there. It felt a bit warmer earlier. Hello there. As we head to the end of the week, most of North America is still mild and still dry as well. Lots of sunshine underneath this large area of high pressure. There is this fast-moving low pressure, this Alberta clipper, racing eastwards into eastern Canada. That's going to bring a spell of heavy snow around the Great Lakes up towards New England as well. And these areas are getting colder too. Let's move our way southwards into Mexico. We've got a few showers, and these still affecting eastern parts of the country, drifting a little bit further south. Maybe one or two more showers into Central America, but nothing particularly heavy here. However, we are going to see some very heavy rain continuing for western parts of Colombia into Ecuador and also into Peru. So some flooding again is quite likely. Also seeing some very heavy rain and frequent thunderstorms moving up into the River Plate and into Uruguay. That in turn could bring with it some flooding as well. Across Europe, it's generally drier and quieter. There's a bit of rain and sleetiness coming into eastern parts of Europe. A few showers perhaps into the southeast of Europe. Temperatures are going to be dropping in Iberia, and we've got some rain falling in the south of Spain and south of Portugal. That's going to be heading its way into Morocco as well, bringing in some colder air here too. But otherwise, northern parts of Africa should see temperatures recovering. Still got some heavy rain around Zambia. It is not quite as wet as it has been in Botswana, and there is a tropical cyclone close to southern parts of Madagascar. It's going to be very wet and very windy here. We've got some stronger winds blowing into the Gulf over the next couple of days, so some rough seas. Otherwise, the showers have moved away. Still quite cold air in place, although temperatures are tending to lift across much of the Middle East. The wet weather that we're seeing in Afghanistan is going to be moving away, but still very wet for northern parts of Pakistan, the northwest of India too, and there'll be a lot of snow falling onto the Himalayas all the way into Nepal. More rain pushing into the far south of India, as well as for Sri Lanka. Looking mostly dry though for Japan, and it's continuing to warm up a bit here as well. Getting particularly warm across many eastern parts of China in the next few days, and of course we've got a lot of heat in Southeast Asia, and we hit those showers further south and more widely around Indonesia and southern parts of the Philippines. For most of Australia, it's going to be dry and sunny. We've got some weak weather fronts running through the bight, just brushing across Tasmania. Only warm sunshine now across many parts of Australia, and some warm sunshine across New Zealand before the weekend sees a band of rain moving into the south. Goodbye.
For the latest news on the Middle East conflict, turn to the Global News podcast, a clarity of today's headlines, interviews and analysis with experts on the region, and answers to the questions you have. Listen to the Global News podcast wherever you get your BBC podcasts.
From Hollywood, talking movies, previews of the 97th Annual Academy Awards. In the wake of LA's devastating wildfires in January, what kind of ceremony can we expect? And we'll be looking at the key Roman riders up for the big Oscar trophies. Join me, Tom Brooks, for Talking Movies on BBC News.
There's a new president in the White House, and Donald Trump has wasted no time in making some big changes. Our special guests bring their insider knowledge from across Washington, D.C. For the latest updates and analysis, join me, Sumi Sansana, and me, Katrina Perry, on BBC News.
This is BBC News. The UK Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer is about to arrive at the White House for crucial talks with Donald Trump.
I'm Katrina Perry, live at the White House. The Prime Minister is due here in the next 15 minutes as part of a concerted European effort to shore up US support for Ukraine.
The online influencer Andrew Tate and his brother have arrived in Florida after being allowed to leave Romania. The lawyer representing alleged victims in the UK say they're dismayed and distraught.
They just don't understand it. They now feel that they've been completely abandoned, and that Tates will never see a criminal prosecution.
And tributes pour in for the Hollywood star Gene Hackman, who's been found dead alongside his wife, Betsy Arakawa, in the US. Welcome to BBC News. The UK Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer is about to arrive at the White House to meet Donald Trump. European leaders are trying to persuade the US President to do more to support Ukraine. Well, trade and tariffs will also dominate, as well as the Middle East, and throw into the mix of all of that the unpredictability that comes with any of these sort of set-piece events with Donald Trump. And it's likely to be a fascinating and consequential next couple of hours. And Katrina Perry, she's there at the White House for us to take us through all of that. And Katrina, as we wait, I can see all the camera crews ready to get the shots at a different entrance to where you are, but a hugely important meeting this.
Absolutely, Matthew. Actually, I'm right at the entrance where the British Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer will arrive in the next 15 minutes. He'll drive just down this driveway right over my shoulder here and to this portico entrance into the West Wing, into the Oval Office. You can probably see there the awaiting media. That's mostly the travelling British pool who've travelled over with the Prime Minister, waiting to get that key shot, that moment, that handshake between the British Prime Minister and the US President Donald Trump. From there, they'll go into the West Wing there, into the Oval Office. There will be an initial sort of press conference there held where some questions will be asked. We're told just a few questions, but as we've seen with these events with the President and visiting world leaders in recent weeks, sometimes those few questions can turn into 20 or 30 minutes of questions. After that, the media will leave, they'll hold their bilateral meeting, then they'll have lunch together, and then there'll be a press conference 2 or 3 hours from now when they will take a lot of questions from the gathered journalists.
Katrina, obviously Ukraine is going to dominate, but the Middle East, trade, you were watching that first cabinet yesterday where Donald Trump talked about all of those areas. It is going to be such a tricky meeting to actually navigate for Sir Keir Starmer.
Absolutely, so many items on the agenda, and I suppose the key to any successful meeting is really to narrow your focus. And we've heard from those with the Prime Minister and also from President Trump's team that the main focus here is Ukraine. We saw French President Emmanuel Macron here on Monday. The Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky will be here tomorrow. Very much a concerted effort from the European leaders to shore up support for Ukraine, in particular a security backstop for any peace deal that may be negotiated into the future. That is something that is really high on the demands of President Zelensky. But as you mentioned, trade and tariffs top of that agenda as well. We know that President Trump wants to see reciprocal tariffs for all nations. That includes the UK. He spoke yesterday about levying 25% tariffs on EU member states. Now, whether he decides to extend that to the UK or not, perhaps we'll hear a little bit later on. Many, many hours of engagement between the two leaders today. Of course, we'll have it all here on BBC News, so stay with us for that. But a little earlier, I spoke to Michael Martins. He worked at the State Department under Presidents Trump, Biden and Obama, so he's a seasoned watcher of these kinds of meetings. And I asked him how well he thinks Sir Keir Starmer's diplomatic efforts have been received so far.
I think Starmer's done a good job of softening the ground. You know, coming out with the defense spending increase and you know, talking about investment into the U.S. from UK businesses, and at the same time, you know, he's coming with his ask. He's asking for an American hard power guarantee in Ukraine post ceasefire, and I think that's going to be a big ask, because I think President Trump instinctively is going to be opposed to it. I think he's going to be focused more on economic deterrence and trying to make it easier for American companies to access Ukrainian markets, and using that as a different type of deterrence that doesn't involve American military.
We saw President Macron, when he was here on Monday, try to make the same ask to President Trump, and President Trump in the meantime has repeated his point that he doesn't want to see US troops there. So how big of an ask is it for Sir Keir Starmer to try again today?
I think it is a pretty big ask, but I think Starmer has done a good job of kind of avoiding a pitfall that Macron fell into, which was telling President Trump that he's making a mistake. I think the fastest way to get President Trump to do something is to tell him that it's a mistake. Whereas I think Starmer has focused much more on the relationship itself and trying to show that there are other ways of doing it that will benefit America too. And you know, Starmer's walking a bit of a tightrope, as you mentioned, with potentially incoming tariffs and things like that. But I do think the approach that he's taking, in the form of whether it be flattery or a bit more transactionalism, and also importantly what he's not saying, he's not coming in talking about Israel-Palestine and those type of things. I think that's going a longer way than Macron's approach.
We've seen much concern amongst European leaders in recent weeks about what appears to be a softening of US relations towards Russia. Do you think will Sir Keir Starmer be trying to roll back that vision from President Trump as well?
I do think so. I think Starmer will go in and probably, well, he might, I don't know, but I think he might go in and highlight that in some ways Russia has kind of placed all its bets on President Trump, and it is a bit of a fragile space that they're in. They don't really have a hedge. And I think if you think of it from that perspective, from the Trumpian perspective, that's a lot of leverage that President Trump could have, which is why I think Russia's tone in this is kind of softened. They are trying to muddy the waters a bit with Ukrainian sovereignty, obviously, in the sense of offering minerals that are in occupied areas that are Ukrainian soil. But at the same time, I think if Starmer can press that point, it'll also potentially shift the mindset of President Trump and give him a bit of a sense of, I have leverage, what do I get out of this? That isn't a way of saying, again, I don't think the approach is to tell President Trump that he's wrong or making a mistake. I don't think that will get him far. It's more about what is Starmer going to offer him when it comes to the US-Russia approach, and I think that's an avenue that he would probably find a lot of benefit in.
So the tone that Sir Keir Starmer is going to take at this meeting is really important, because of course he's not just here arguing the case for Ukraine, he's arguing the case for the UK as well. This is the first meeting that he's had with Donald Trump since he became president again, although the two men did meet in New York in September, and Sir Keir Starmer and Donald Trump had a lengthy lunch date there, 2 hours or so. So they've spoken also a number of times on the phone. There is a close relationship between the two men, and today Sir Keir Starmer needs to really cement that special relationship for the next 4 years.
Katrina, we're looking at a close-up shot where we expect the car in the next few minutes. So we will back to you in a moment or two. We're jumping, of course, the important stories of the day. That Keir Starmer meeting absolutely dominating, but for the last little while we've had that picture on the right-hand side of the screen, the Tate brothers. We've seen the plane land, and let's head back to Florida just for a moment or two and show you the pictures from that exit at the airport, because Andrew and Tristan Tate arriving in the US from Romania, and also there at the airport is Neda Tawfik, our correspondent. And Neda, let me bring you in. And so this is quite a surprise. The day started with these two in Romania, and it ends with them back in the US.
That's right, Matthew, and just to basically walk you around what has become a little bit of a scene here at a private terminal at Fort Lauderdale where the brothers have landed. You'll see to my right, there are some members of the sheriff's office. They've come here just to make sure that everything here is calm. Inside is this terminal where we believe the Tate brothers are going through customs. Of course, it was an international flight, and we're waiting to see if they will be coming speak to the press. Inside, we also caught a few members of what we believe are the Tate's security. And then here to my left, you can see a number of media have gathered, and one or two members of the public as well. So as I say, we are waiting to see if the Tate brothers will take any questions from the press. There are no shortage of questions, including, of course, what guarantees the Romanian prosecutors will have that the Tate brothers will return. They have said that they are innocent, so we will wait to see if they commit here to returning to Romania for that ongoing criminal investigation and case. Also, how this all came about and what role President Trump may have personally played, because we know members of his administration did push the Romanian government to lift the travel ban on the two brothers. So, Matthew, as I say, we're just here waiting to see if they will speak, and we'll, of course, bring you the absolute latest.
You're absolutely right in terms of those open questions, because we were hearing from the lawyer, from those people in the UK who are bringing cases, civil cases, criminal cases. They are aghast at what has happened, and they fear that there will be no ability to pursue the criminal cases now. When are the two brothers are supposed to go back to Romania, if that were to happen, so the Romanians can continue with these cases? Because the cases are hugely serious. They're of rape, they're of trafficking minors, they're of money laundering.
That's right, Matthew, and our understanding is that by the end of March, there is another court date in the matter. And you mentioned those who were just shocked by the fact that the travel ban had been lifted and that they've been allowed to travel here. Well, among those who were caught off guard and shocked was Florida's Governor Ron DeSantis. He was actually asked this morning if he had any prior notice, and he said essentially that the Tate brothers are not welcome in Florida, that anybody accused of that type of conduct isn't welcome in this state. And he said he was going to be looking into what kind of jurisdiction the state has, but then also expressed confidence in Donald Trump's Justice Department and Homeland Security that they would handle this matter. Now, he wouldn't expand on that. Of course, he's a Republican governor of Florida. While he has been a foe of Donald Trump's in the past, running against him in the last election, he is considered an ally in the party. And so it'll be interesting to see how much he does push back on the fact that he wasn't given notice. But ultimately, when the brothers were given back their passports, it is the federal government that has jurisdiction over entry into this country, and here they are.
Neda Tawfik, thanks for taking us through all of that. That's Neda Tawfik there in Florida live for us. Let's go back to the White House and back to Katrina Perry, who is there, and of course the cameras all set up, and you can see the flags ready for when Sir Keir Starmer arrives. And Katrina was talking to us a short while ago and was saying it was expected around 5:15 UK time, and we're edging up to that. So I don't think we're that far away. Katrina, let me bring you back in, because you were watching, I was watching. It was this time yesterday that Donald Trump's first cabinet, we had about an hour of the US president taking us through a whole variety of key issues. At one stage, though, he rather boasted that about the cabinet, they follow my orders, no exception. I suppose the question here we might get a bit more of an understanding about is the US president listening to the European leaders who are coming to talk to him?
Well, that's the big question, Matthew. And when we saw the French President Emmanuel Macron here on Monday, President Trump didn't really shift his position too much after that meeting, despite President Macron's best efforts. We saw him live fact-checking President Trump in terms of the contribution that the European Union has made to military aid to Ukraine. But despite that, President Trump has repeated since then his own figures regarding EU support and US support. So the point from President Macron did not land on that occasion. He was asked repeatedly during that impromptu press conference at the cabinet meeting yesterday about this notion of peacekeepers and kind of peacekeeping force for Ukraine, and the desire from President Zelensky and the European leaders and the UK Prime Minister to have the US underpin that security backstop in some sort of way. And by the end of yesterday's press conference, President Trump was making a joke about how many times he was being asked
that question by reporters and refused to give any sort of guarantee that the US would provide that security underpinning. I have to say there is very little appetite in the US for the US military to be involved in Ukraine in any way. The appetite even for the US to continue its military aid to Ukraine is diminishing, and we've seen that in recent months from the President through the Republican members of Congress through to the general population as well. So the notion that there will be US military on the ground in Ukraine is quite a hard sell from President Trump to the American people. So that is something that's working against Sir Keir Starmer today and against the European leaders who've come through and will come through in coming days.
Katrina, let's talk trade for the next couple of minutes, because over the last few weeks we've had those tariffs imposed on China, on Canada, on Mexico. Yesterday he was talking about 25% tariffs on the EU. The UK slightly not in his sights thus far. What are people expecting there?
Exactly, he hasn't targeted the UK in the same way that he's targeted the EU, because the trade balance of payments between the UK and the US is more level than it is with the EU, and particularly with individual EU member states who would have a trade surplus when it comes to the US, and that's something that President Trump wants to wipe out. He has spoken though about reciprocal tariffs, and he has said that the UK would be subject to those. It will come up during that meeting today. It's absolutely on the agenda of the UK Prime Minister, and speaking to some of the administration officials here, it is on the agenda for President Trump as well. Of course, we know how much he likes tariffs. He says that's the most beautiful word in the English language, calls himself the tariff king. And everything that President Trump does is, of course, America first. It's about getting fairness for America. That's another word we hear from him a lot, that anywhere that he feels that America is hard done by, he wants to end that situation. So we will hear something about that. Of course, we saw the UK had to do a bilateral trade deal with the US under the Biden administration in the wake of Brexit, and that went nowhere. Sir Keir Starmer will be pushing to try and get a separate arrangement for the UK and US today. So we'll see. Maybe we'll have some announcement on that in that.
I'll give you the cup.
Katrina, let me ask you about another
Okay, the cup for you, the cup.
The Middle East and Gaza, because of course we're in the first phase of what's supposed to be a three-phase deal. We got to the end over the last 24 hours of the hostage releases and Palestinians being released.
This is for tomorrow.
Where are we now in terms of what the US position is of getting stage two?
This was what to get my money back.
Well, we know President Trump's special envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, is due to travel to the Middle East on Sunday. Now, obviously, the current phase of the ceasefire runs out on Saturday, and any kind of meaningful negotiations have yet to begin. So that is causing a little concern in the region. And then you have this plan that President Trump unveiled during that press conference with the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, when he was here as the first world leader to visit President Trump. And that seems to be still the view of President Trump, that the best idea that he sees for Gaza for the end of the peace deal is to somehow relocate the people who live there. Now, there is no interest in that in the region from the Palestinian people and from the neighbouring countries, so that's a dead end as far as they're concerned. But really, in terms of what comes next, there's very little progress being made. As you know, there are still hostages, Israeli hostages being held in Gaza, and now that the Israeli public has become used to seeing hostages and deceased hostages, their remains being released in the past few weeks, there will be pressure on the Prime Minister Netanyahu to have those releases continue. So that is where everyone is kind of hoping the focus shifts from now. And will it come up during the meeting between Sir Keir Starmer and Donald Trump today? It hasn't been really from either side that it's top of the agenda. Ukraine and trade very much up there, but it's hard to see that they don't discuss about that.
If we now talk about Japan a short while ago in the programme, we were talking about how the Brits like to talk about the special relationship, and it has been a really important relationship for generations. Where is President Trump when it comes to talking about the special relationship with the UK?
Well, we don't think the UK Keir Starmer can bring today, of course, is to potentially offer either a trip to meet King Charles or potentially for King Charles or William Kate to come here to the US during President Trump's term in office. I think that is something that would really bolster the special relationship and would be warmly received by President Trump and by his wider team. That special relationship is important to President Trump. He knows that the UK is a key partner, but he does care about America first and foremost. So the UK has to come here today offering something, preparing to be an equal partner with Donald Trump and to not in any way damage the United States.
We were watching earlier the week with Emmanuel Macron sitting there, listening to what Donald Trump was saying, occasionally fact-checking him. In terms of what you've heard from White House officials, how did the Trump administration view all of that?
I'll just tell you, Matthew, sorry, before I answer that question, that we are seeing a little bit of movement here behind me on the driveway. Some of the troops getting into position there, and some of the security vehicles have just arrived. So we might be just moments away from the arrival of Sir Keir Starmer. But in terms of the tone that President Macron struck and the tone that Sir Keir Starmer will have to strike as well today, you know, we've heard from many people who are close to President Trump, including the Vice President J.D. Vance, that what you don't do is insult President Trump. You don't tell him that he's wrong. You don't tell him that he's made a mistake. You choose your language very carefully. You know, we heard President Macron refer to Russia as an aggressor repeatedly during those various interactions with President Trump on Monday, but he didn't say, you are wrong, President Trump, to call President Zelensky a dictator. You are wrong in your viewpoint that Ukraine somehow had a role in starting this war. So that kind of approach is very important. The language is important, particularly in public. Whatever is said behind closed doors, of course, we've no idea what that is, but whatever is said in public can't undermine or embarrass or insult President Trump in any way. You know, he doesn't take that very well. And I think we've seen a good indication of the tone that Sir Keir Starmer will take from those remarks that he made at the British Embassy last night with the ambassador, Peter Mandelson, as well. Very much speaking about President Trump in friendly terms, and you know, what a great and exceptional president he is, how important this time is for America for the special relationship. I think we'll see a lot of that. A really good calling card that the Prime Minister had today, of course, is that announcement just a few days ago to boost defence spending up to 2.5%. That will go down really well with President Trump. We've heard him speak so often in office about countries should contribute more to their defence spending. Now, interestingly, speaking to some of the senior administration officials here this morning, they said the president's going to say, you got to get that figure to 5%. So although the minister has increased it, President Trump looking for that figure to increase even more.
Yes, it is part of the choreography for this week. I'm sure that we have that major announcement about the increase in spending in defence ahead of this visit. But you were talking about the dynamic. I suppose one of the things we will see play out in the next hour or so is how nimble the UK Prime Minister might be, because on those issues like defence, he has made this adjustment that he knows that Donald Trump will appreciate. It's whether, as they're sitting in that Oval Office, if there are things the US President says that perhaps counter what the UK position, counter what the European position, what the UK President does at that stage, and whether that's awkward. All of that we shall watch very closely to see how that plays out. And as we wait for the UK Prime Minister to arrive, we're told he's delayed. We know he's delayed already by about 10 minutes or so. Tomorrow, of course, President Zelensky is there at the White House. Is it any clearer where we are with the minerals deal in terms of what exactly the Americans have agreed to from their side of any deal?
We don't have any firm details of that deal yet, Matthew, and I think
So I'll put the clock at what time for tomorrow?
Zelensky gets here tomorrow. I think it will be discussed in the meeting between President Trump and the Prime Minister today in terms of perhaps those final details. We know President Zelensky really,
Mike,
really cares
for
about
you, what time you want to get up at?
backstop, and until that is inserted in the deal, we're
Five?
told there is no
5:30?
final deal. We're hearing a slightly different version of events from
You'll
the
be ready by
Americans and from
6:30?
the Ukrainians about how advanced that
Put your
deal
clock
is.
at 5:30,
President Trump reported
5:31
and
and 5:32 or something,
again
okay?
today that he feels the US
Mine's
is
at
being
5:30.
treated unfairly in terms of the support that it's providing to Ukraine, and it doesn't feel that it's getting.
Hey, honey, give me the Kleenex over there, please.
So I think we'll hear that line again. But in terms of the firm details of that, we don't have that. We don't know yet whether it's, mining and exploratory rights for
I'm
these
okay, I'm
minerals that the US will have, or whether they will have an entitlement to these minerals, these rare earths that have already been mined and are in a harvested, if you want, condition. And which parts of Ukraine is this? Are they the mines that are currently in the territories that are occupied by Russia? What would that mean? It is being seen, though, as a cementing of the relationship between the US and Russia. If the US has such an added interest in the country, that therefore it has an extra interest in peace and in guaranteeing that peace.
I suppose the critical thing, and I suspect we will learn tomorrow more of the actual details, is how different this deal was to the original one that was put underneath President Zelensky's nose. It is reported he was told he had an hour to sign, and in a sense it was all retrospective, with the Americans reportedly saying, well, this is what America has spent so far supporting Ukraine, and that is the money that we need to actually claw back. And they were talking and using the figure of $500 billion. Of course, that figure has been fact-checked multiple times in terms of an exaggeration of what America has spent compared to Europe. But I suppose the focus will be on how much of that deal, which President Zelensky thought was totally unacceptable, has changed to any sort of deal that he is prepared to sign.
Yeah, the evolution of this deal is really interesting, and I suppose we'll only really know after the fact. But when you said it was President Zelensky who brought this deal in the first place to Donald Trump back in September, even before the election, and that moved on then to the deal that was brought back to him in Ukraine a couple of weeks ago. The Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent traveling to Kyiv himself, and then President Zelensky not signing that deal. President Trump tells the story that President Zelensky was asleep at the time that Scott Bessent arrived. No way of fact-checking that, of course, but it was perceived as a terrific slight to Scott Bessent and to President Trump that he had gone the whole way to Kyiv to get the paper inked on this, and it didn't happen. Then you fast forward to a point this week where it looks like there is a deal done. Again, as we've been saying, we don't know what the final details of that are, and I suspect they won't even be finalized until moments before they're signed tomorrow. We know President Trump likes to do quite dramatic signings. He's even do that with the executive orders in the Oval Office in his big heavy black pen and showing the documents to the camera. So I suspect if the deal is ready by tomorrow, we will see some sort of ceremony like that ahead of the press conference that both leaders will have tomorrow.
Wow, what's the
We're
deal?
getting ahead of ourselves because we've got Scott
Really?
Keir Starmer
what, honey?
to arrive there at
I wasn't listening to what
clearly
you were
been
saying.
delayed, but we are told, I'm hearing just in my ears as I'm watching these pictures and talking to Katrina, that we're expecting in the next minute or so Sir Keir Starmer to arrive there at the White House. And Katrina, as we've been saying, we're on the pictures which are showing the doorway, and there is movement at the doorway, so I think we're not very far away. And the exact pictures that we saw earlier in the week when Donald Trump met Emmanuel Macron at the door. So the honour guard is all ready, and that visit is about to get underway. And as we've been saying, it is a hugely important visit. Keir Starmer going there to Washington with a very clear message, and the build-up through the course of the week, that major announcement he made at Westminster saying that the UK was bringing forward the increase in spending on defence, 2.5% of GDP by 2027, 3% by 2030, exactly the sort of thing that Donald Trump, since his first term in the White House, has been putting pressure on European countries to pay more to NATO. So despite the various criticisms of the US President's approach to NATO and those concerns about whether he would abide by Article 5, which is an attack on one would be an attack on all. He has pressurized those European countries to increase their spending on NATO, and certainly we've seen that from Poland, we've seen it now from the UK, but of course, as Katrina was saying, the US President only saying a week or so ago that he wanted that figure to actually be 5%, so as much as the UK have changed their position, in a sense, the finish line has got even further away, so that I'm sure will be part of the discussions. But the US Defence Secretary saying earlier in the week that they noted that move by the UK and they thought it was significant. So some of the groundwork before this meeting of the UK Prime Minister clearly being put in place, but some of the harder discussions, well, that's still lies ahead on all those areas that Katrina and I have been talking about, the actual policy that they're trying to get the US President to just move slightly on in terms of the amount of support that the US gives Ukraine. That's certainly the key issue that will be discussed there. Of course, his comments, we saw it in the Munich conference with J.D. Vance there, so alarming European leaders about the US approach to Russia, the US approach to Europe and NATO. That has galvanized European countries into active, into talking about the need for them to
I can see why you'd say that, but it's actually, it's a car dealership. They sell like Lambos and Ferraris and stuff. Okay, so you have the wrong license plate on the car.
Hello, TikTokers. A little up close magic. Now listen, that's up close as you can get. First, nothing in my hands, empty. And then what I'm gonna do is make a little hole in my hand. We'll call this hole Elon Musk. Okay? The hole is Elon Musk. Now it's simple. Good old red cell Social Security. Now let's give Social Security to Elon Musk. Make sure Elon Musk has all the Social Security. Now, what happens is your Social Security, well, it's gone. Any questions? Hello, TikTok.
The family can't afford the inheritance tax on the ranch. I wouldn't think so. You can't afford to buy it.
I wish I could, Casey. Only corporations have the money to buy your land. And it is land no more. Subdivisions, shopping centers, and condos. Airports and resorts. Everything eventually they will recreate on your land.
My vision told me that
Starmer, who is Starmer?
my family on the other ranch. They always say, I used to think that meant that one couldn't be saved. Then I realized that only meant that I couldn't save. But you can. My ancestors came here and then sold from $1.25 an acre.
decided we're supposed to be innocent until proven guilty, as my brother and I are. And I think it's extremely important that we stop allowing media spin.
You should see these influencers, some of the videos that they put online, how they talk really bad about girls.
Trying to destroy the reputation of people who have no attention to anything other than
Prostitution, selling girls, okay, pimping.
Well, a brief statement from Andrew Tate before he gets in the car, surrounded by security.
They took him down, okay, from YouTube, okay, from
Yeah,
TikTok.
because they have to block them because
Just take us through what Andrew Tate said when he addressed the cameras in full.
Yeah, well, Andrew Tate came out, his brother Tristan beside him, and essentially his message was that everybody is innocent until proven guilty. But then he went into some of his more controversial talking points, saying that it was essentially all, conspiracy against him, that he didn't do anything wrong. I tried, Matthew, to ask what guarantees there would be that he would go back to Romania if he did commit to doing that, because the case there isn't closed despite the travel ban being lifted, and if he'd given any assurances to the Romanian government that he would return. He didn't answer that question. And then I did also press about whether Donald Trump had helped in the matter. Certainly that members of the administration had pushed the Romanian government to lift the travel ban. But essentially, Andrew Tate coming out in a very defiant way, saying that to not believe media spin against him, that he had done nothing wrong, and then he got in and drove off.
As we've been reporting, some of the victims here in the UK who have criminal cases, who have civil cases, are aghast at today's developments. They had no idea this was coming. The day started with them in Romania, it ends then with them in the US, saying they are innocent. What happens with the court case? I mean, the Romanians are expecting them to go back, but there must be now a huge question mark about whether they do.
Hey, Katy Perry's going to go into space.
Several of the lawyers that represent some of his accusers in the UK, for example, expressing real frustration that saying Romania should be embarrassed by what they did. The accusers were just devastated, but then also raising questions about the US-UK relationships. The lawyer, one of them, Matthew Brent, had suggested that Downing Street knew about this for over a week and asked why nothing had been done, because as we know, there is an extradition request that was approved by Romanian courts to have the brothers taken to the UK, where they are facing a civil case of rape and human trafficking. So
Human
there was
trafficking,
that
yeah.
question mark of how will that then proceed as well? Will the Trump administration agree to extradite them if the UK asks? It's certainly, the timing is complicated, of course, Matthew, with Prime Minister there at the White House.
I talked there about those people through their lawyers who feel that they've been totally blindsided. They're not the only people, because Florida's governor had absolutely no idea this was about to happen either.
That's right. You know, Ron DeSantis had a press conference this morning unrelated to this, but he was asked about the Tate brothers being last-minute flight here to Fort Lauderdale, and he revealed that he was given no advance warning whatsoever. He didn't know anything about it. And on top of that, Matthew, he said that they are not welcome here in Florida, that anyone who is facing those types of allegations is not welcome in the state. So it's interesting because Ron DeSantis, Republican governor, certainly aligned with Donald Trump's agenda, but they have had risks in the past, and he did not the brothers into the United States.
Nelly Torvik, thanks very much. Thanks for firing those questions as Andrew Tate and Tristan arrived there. We went to it in the middle of that news conference. It was very short. These are the pictures. After 2 minutes, the doors opened, and Andrew Tate and his brother coming out, and as Nelly was taking us through, were denying the allegations against them, but of course, there are so many allegations that
Let's
are
hit the
leveled
ball,
at Andrew
that's the
Christian
real
Tate,
trouble.
allegations of rape, allegations of trafficking minors, allegations of money laundering, and of course, that the Romanians say remains an active case, and in March they are supposed to have the next part of that case. So I was saying to Netta, will they return? We shall see if that actually happens. But the pictures of Andrew Tate and his brother arriving there. They've now arrived in Florida, gone through the airport, and you saw they got into the car and have now left the scene. But those the latest developments, pictures and comments. Let's return to the main event of the day, this meeting between the UK Prime Minister and Donald Trump. About 5 or 7 minutes ago, those pictures happening, the meeting, they're now inside the Oval Office talking. We usually in these meetings get a burst of pictures from the Oval Office. You will recall all the camera crews and reporters in there firing questions at the two leaders. It was so interesting when the French president was there. The amount of time actually Donald Trump answered those questions. It was exactly the same when the King of Jordan was there as well. So I'm sure we're likely to see a similar type of thing, and so many important issues to actually go through. James Landale, our diplomatic correspondent, here in the studio with me. And James, those pictures from the last 2 minutes. We'll talk about some of the issues in a moment, but before I let the Prime Minister to always talk about the atmospherics of meetings like this. With Emmanuel Macron, he'd had a number of meetings with Donald Trump. What is the relationship like thus far with Keir Starmer?
Well, remember, Mr. Macron and Mr. Trump have known each other for much longer and have operated together for much longer throughout Mr. Trump's first term in office. So Mr. Starmer is a much more, it's a newer, fresher relationship. And not without its mishaps. I mean, when the Prime Minister last met Mr. Trump, it was at Trump Towers in New York in September during the United Nations General Assembly. You know, the President offered up Guyanese chicken. The Prime Minister did not eat, so there was quite a bit around that one. So there are all those, but they seem to have decent mood music at the moment. One point that I think has landed, particularly with Americans, and it is a point that the Prime Minister emphasises, is his political permanence. The fact that he, unlike many European leaders, has a healthy parliamentary majority, and he's going to be around for the next 4 and a bit years. I think that is something that the American system has clocked compared to much more political instability and weakness in other leaderships around Europe. I think also the meeting, Sir Keir Starmer has played it relatively cannily. He's avoided open confrontation with Mr. Trump. He's contradicted Mr. Trump, but he hasn't done it live on telly. He's done it in sort of emails from He's also promised defence spending, electricity defence spending in the UK. He's also lavished lots of praise on Mr. Trump, calling him, you know, his close friend and things like that. So that's the sort of diplomatic warm words of prayer. But that is actually so far. Everything depends on what actually happens face to face in this meeting, and that can go anywhere.
Before we get to some of those issues, and just to reference the pictures, this from about 15 minutes ago, so they're inside the Oval Office now, but just a warm handshake, smile, a thumbs up from President Trump. A few questions shouted at the two before actually went in. The phrase not used, James, about UK being a bridge to Europe, is the US President much minded about that, a bridge to Europe? And where is he when it comes to, again, the Brits like to talk about a special relationship, but where's the US President?
I think he places less emphasis on it than the Brits do. That's just the honest truth. I think he likes to talk to different European leaders. He has much depends on the personal relationship he has with them and his past dealings with them. We know he has some affinity with the UK because he likes the royal family. He has, you know, golf club connections in Scotland and his mother's antecedents there.
but that doesn't, as the phrase goes, doesn't buy you lunch in Washington. This will be about hard transactionalism, and the key test will be whether or not Sir Keir Starmer can somehow break in to that information.
What are the lights here?
Here? What's time to sleep, honey?
No, I'm just telling something like that.
Oh, yeah?
195.